Good evening and welcome to the Council meeting. I'm Councillor Gerard Hargreaves, the Mayor, and this meeting is being held in accordance with recent government regulations on holding virtual meetings. Please bear with us if we run into some technical challenges during the meeting as we adapt to these new ways of working. At the outset, I would ask that councillors only unmute their microphones when they are addressing the meeting. Likewise, to save bandwidth, I would ask councillors only to switch on their cameras when speaking, and remember to switch off their cameras after having spoken. If councillors wish to speak on a particular item and have not been called to speak, please indicate by typing the letter Q in the conversation column or by drawing my attention by speaking up. Please do not use a conversation column for other comments, as they can be seen by all participants. And to assist your fellow councillor officers and members of the public watching online to identify you, please state your name before you speak. This month marks the 3rd anniversary of the fire at Grenfell Tower, where 72 of our residents tragically lost their lives. At this special time, I ask every member of the council to pay our deepest and continuing respect in the conventional manner by marking the moment with 72 seconds silence now. Thank you. At this time, I'm sure that I speak for the whole council in expressing our sincerest condolences to each and every member of our Kensington and Chelsea community who have lost family members, neighbours, friends or colleagues to this current coronavirus pandemic. At this moment, the pandemic continues, but the spirit and heart of our community will shine through and overcome this crisis. The minutes of the annual meeting of the Council held on the 20th of May have been circulated. I shall take these as read and sign them as a current record unless anybody has a point to raise. Thank you. I will now sign these. I shall now ask the Chief Executive to give any apologies for absence or lateness from this virtual meeting.
Barry Quirk, the Council's Chief Executive. There are two councillors who notified us of their absence, Councillor Bakhtiar and Councillor Kasim Ali.
Thank you. I shall now read out a list of all members to ascertain attendance at this meeting. Members are reminded that for the meeting to be quorum, we must have at least 13 councillors present at all times. In order to manage the roll call as swiftly as possible, please just remember to switch on your microphone and answer here when your name is called, and switch off your microphone as soon as you have answered. I shall go down in alphabetical order of all councillors. Councillor Addenbrooke.
Here.
Councillor Udurian.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aretti.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Atkinson.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bennett. Councillor Beryl Cox.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Blakeman.
Here.
Councillor Campbell. Councillor Campbell.
I can't unmute my.
Councillor Chowan.
Present.
Councillor Siren.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dent Code.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor El Nagi. Councillor El Nagi. Councillor Evans.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Folkes.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Freeman.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hammond.
Here, sir.
Councillor Healy. Councillor Healy. Councillor Henderson.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Did you
Thank you.
mine?
Councillor Healy, I did get yours, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Husband.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Idris.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Jackson.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kamali.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lowry.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lindsay.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Marshall. Councillor Marshall on the motorway. Councillor Mason.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McVeigh.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mills.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Nile.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Connor.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palmer. Councillor Palmer. Councillor Pascal.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Press.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rendell.
Yes, here.
Councillor Rossi.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Round.
Here.
Councillor Schmittling.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Spalding.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor Smith.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Salafitis.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Thaxter. Councillor Wade.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wilson.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wheel.
Here.
Councillor Will.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Woodger.
Here, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Mayor, present, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Thaxter.
Who was that, please? Was that Councillor Thaxter?
Yes, Mr.
Thank you very
Mayor.
much.
And me, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me? Councillor Campbell.
I've got you now. Yes, thank you, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you.
I would advise councillors that they are present in a meeting and so they should observe the rules and behaviour set out in the Councillors' Code of Conduct. Councillors are reminded to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest in any matter before the Council this evening and leave the meeting before such matter is considered. Are there any such declarations?
No.
Thank you. Item 4, public questions. This evening we will be devoting up to an hour for public questions. These were invited via the council website. I will read the questions and then ask the lead member to respond. Then the spokesman from the minority party will also be given an opportunity to respond. The first question, submitted by Thomas Mawson. Firstly, thank you to the council for the opportunity to submit a question. I am a resident of the borough who, working from home in these current circumstances, have been able to enjoy so much more of the borough in its daylight hours. I have noticed in particular that the pedestrianisation of Pavilion Road appears to bring real advantages and much needed support to the local businesses there, especially in dealing with the new COVID-19 related rules and circumstances. Please would you update the community on this project, on any other pedestrianisation proposal, and also how the councillors continue to engage with and support businesses in high streets across the borough. It's the end of the question. Who would like to respond from the leadership team, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I respond, please?
Thank you, Councillor Thalcides.
So thank you, Thomas, for that question on the Pavilion Road, which I think is just one of the many really exciting things we're doing at the moment to promote active travel. This has all started out of government guidance that wants us to promote walking and cycling. We're seeing so much more of it on our streets, and at the same time to protect lives and protect livelihoods here in Kensington and Chelsea. I was actually just on Pavilion Road last night, and I could see the enormous difference it was making. I was fighting for room at the seats by those new planters we've got at either end of the road, and speaking to some of the traders and businesses along the street. I think they're all really excited about what we're doing. It's going really well. We're seeing lots more people using that amenity space and making the most of it. And just the same, we've done similar on Portobello Road. We're looking at Bute Street on the 4th of July to kickstart our economy as some of our new freedoms from lockdown begin to emerge. It's something that we think can be really positive as we come out of lockdown, is setting out new plans for businesses to thrive in the post sort of lockdown era. We were just speaking to the Kensington Business Forum, in fact, this week, and asking them whether there are other opportunities in their area, potentially around the high street, to go and widen pavements as we've done on Kings Road, Notting Hill Gate, Kensington High Street, north, south, middle, all over the borough, and to see how we can build on that and make sure that everybody can move safely around the borough during this extremely worrying time.
Thank you. Thank you. Who would like to respond from the Labour group, please?
I think I will, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
That Mason councillor. I've personally been a long-time supporter and campaigner for widening pavements and pedestrianising shopping streets for many of the reasons that Councillor Thalcides has mentioned. As more and more traffic built up over the decades on our streets, many of the shopping streets which 20, 30 years ago had not much traffic, and particularly markets like Portobello and Goulburn Market and Kensington High Street, increasingly they got clogged up with traffic and complaints about dangerous speeding and the conflict between cars and vehicles and shops and market stalls if it was a market street. All of these things came into conflict, and it's taken the council, of course, quite a long time to get to the place that we are now, because at one time we did have quite a lot of bus lanes in the borough, and we campaigned for a long time, me and my Labour colleagues, for segregated cycle lanes down Ladbroke Grove, Kensington High Street and many other places in the borough, but that was seen to be in conflict at that time with the right of the vehicles to travel through our borough, which many of us thought we should either curtail or take advantage of our own environment, rather than thinking that it was a good idea to have walls of vehicles going through the borough who didn't stop here or spend money here. So the direction is good. I hope it. I hope it can continue, because really in this new, when we move beyond COVID, which is going to be a year or two probably, we really do need to reimagine how our streets and markets and shopping areas are used for all the reasons that we all know, because otherwise we will have streets full of empty shops that will be used as motorways. So we really need to have residents decide that. They need to decide that with us, with the council. So I'm very, very happy to hear questions like this from residents like Thomas, because it means that the residents are supporting and wanting us to move more and quicker in that direction. And I certainly hope we will, and me and my Labour colleagues will certainly support any such move forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. To question 2. This has been submitted by Vesna Vukovic. I have been living in the Sutton Estate as a temporary tenant for 12 years, with my 2 kids and a dog. I came when my son was not even a year old and pregnant with my daughter, who is now 16. as a victim of domestic violence. I was told they were demolishing the estate and we were forced to move out. I ended up in bed and breakfast with my 2 kids in a basement tiny room for 10 months, where I had to share a double bed with my 13-year-old son. I then found a place on a houseboat, and after a while I had to move on and lived there for just over 3 years. I then rented another flat in Chelsea since November 2019, and after 6 months I am being evicted again through no fault of my own. If I had not been illegally moved out of the Sutton estate, my life would not have been such a misery for all these years. I am working as a key worker at the Brompton Hospital and am now working as a frontline worker. Could I ask the council to take my case seriously and offer me and my children somewhere to call home and relieve my nightmares, please? Every time we move, I am poorer and poorer, always in huge difficulties to find a guarantor, etc. Is it possible for me to move back to the Southern Estate or another council property, as after 12 years as their temporary tenant on the Sutton Estate, myself and my family should not have been treated so badly? Don't you think we have paid such a huge price for refusing one and only direct offer, never being shortlisted? Could I also thank Councillor Henderson for his continued support, even though he is not my councillor? The end of the question. Who would like to respond from the leadership team, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm very happy
Councillor Taylor-Smith.
to respond. And first of all, can I just thank Rhona for raising this issue? And I'm very sorry to hear of her plight. Obviously, we have a policy that we cannot discuss individual cases at a council meeting, but we do have a review procedure and we'll consider any homelessness application. And if Rhona would like to make that as a new application, I've asked officers to look into the case. I think suffices to say that, you know, we've got some real challenges in RBKC, and there is a homelessness and rough sleeping strategy that's currently under consideration. And this includes how we prevent homelessness through eviction in the first place, which is obviously very relevant to this particular case. And also, as part of our housing strategy, we've scheduled a review of our allocations policy at the end of the year. You know, but the stark fact is that we have 2,300 people in temporary accommodation and 3,500 on our housing register who are still waiting for a home within the borough. And I recognise that some of the measures, such as only one offer in our allocations policy, you know, do appear to be very harsh. But it's particularly important that we do apply these policies as they're currently drafted fairly and consistently. But thank you for submitting your question.
Thank you. Who would like to respond from the Labour Group, please?
Yeah, I would, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
Kim, thanks for those answers. And I know that you know the case. I've been dealing with Vesna on and off since 2015. And the reason she keeps coming back to me is obviously by being moved to all these different areas, she loses contact. I don't want to go into her case individually, but there's 200 empty properties on the Sutton estate at the minute that are due to be refurbished. And I think what I'd like to ask Kim Taylor-Smith is, Kim, do you know, have Clarion let us know yet how many of those properties on the Sutton estate will be given to the council as part of the allocations thing? And also, we need to think with women like Vesna, you know, it's very hard to bring up a kid, 2 children and a dog for whatever reasons. And I'm just wondering what the cost implication is for Vesna, both to the council and on our normal services, because of the disruption to her life. And I think that's a cost thing we'd like to look at moving forward, because sometimes the simplest option is sometimes the cheapest option. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And as normal, these were fully answered by the council, by the leadership team in due course. So question number 3. Please can the council take note of the extremely small public consultation period of less than 3 weeks given for the highly significant 6-storey planning application of Unit 10 Latimer Road, London, W10 6RQ, which will set a precedent for the remainder of the road with devastating effects for its residents and community, which has taken place during the period of lockdown when residents are required to stay in their homes, and confirm that it will take the matter to a full and extended public consultation, including an independent impact assessment, given the enormous degree of anger and distress that the residents that this application has caused. Leadership team, please.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm happy to answer. Thank you very much indeed for the question, and I think this is why the public speaking hour is such a good thing, because it does shine a light on things that sometimes we haven't got quite right. I'm very sensitive to the perception that sometimes people in and around Latimer Road don't feel as though the council responds to some of their questions quite as they would like, and so what I've done is I've followed up on this this afternoon, and I've clarified with our Director of Planning, Amanda Reid, that we can go away and extend the full public consultation for at least an extra 2 weeks to try and make sure that at a time when everybody's very busy and clearly there's significant anger and distress around this application with at least 15 objections already, we can make provision for all of those people who do care so strongly about this to get their views on record, and we can determine this application in the fairest possible way.
Thank you. And I think I forgot to mention that this question was submitted by Marianne MacDonald. The
So
Labour Group.
thank you to Marianne in that case.
The Labour Group, please. Do you want to respond? Nobody from the Labour Group, in the which.
Councillor Den Code is down to respond to this. 1 second.
If Councillor Den Code doesn't, I will.
Let's give her a second to, if she's able to unmute herself and then come on.
Councillor Den Code.
Yeah, sorry, I just couldn't get through to the. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me and see me?
Can do. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, Emma Dent-Code, and I sit on the planning committee, so I can't actually say what I think about this. I may or may not be called to actually speak at this particular committee. Yes, obviously during lockdown, people who are shielded or isolated at home won't see that very precious A4 notice stuck to a tree somewhere. So it's no surprise that they haven't seen that. And I've also been bombarded with all kinds of emails, and bless you, carry on doing that by all means. And thank you, Councillor Seages, for the additional couple of weeks. You know, the planning process is not a political process. It's independent. It's in theory, it's and quasi-judicial. So we can't be told what to say. Each member decides independently on the evidence we have. So it's very important that people write to us. And please tell everybody who's for or against to write to anybody who may sit on that committee. So you have a captive audience, so well done, and just keep writing to us. There is some time. You know, members of the planning committee read everything. We get massive documents, about 3 inches thick sometimes. We do go through all of that, and we take everyone's concerns very, very seriously. We're all very familiar with the area. As I said, we'll take it seriously when the time comes, and it's good that we've got a bit of extra time. Please keep writing to us. That's what we're here for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So let's move on now to our fourth question, submitted by Ellie Lines. Our high streets were in need of love before COVID, and now the need is desperate, especially small independent stores, cafes and businesses. I wondered if there is some sort of incentive to encourage people not to go online, but to get them out into their local neighbourhoods. A discount of some kind, a reward scheme. Shopping local for fresh food can be more expensive than supermarkets, but it is often much better quality. I also would love to see more street pedestrianisation to enable more cafes and restaurants to put seating outside to meet the measures and be able to make enough revenue to survive. Any other question? Who would like to respond from the leadership team, please?
I'll respond to that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hello, I'm Councillor Catherine Folkes, and I think this question is from Ellie, And I just wanted to say thank you very much for your question, and I completely agree with everything that you say in it. As you say, before COVID, the high streets were really struggling for all the reasons that we know, the cost of business rates, the competition from online companies, high rents, and the fact that there was already 33% too much retail space. And these problems really have just been turbocharged by what's been happening with COVID. And as a result, I think as a council, we've got to do the same. We've got to respond really, really quickly and use whatever levers the council has and come up with some very bold and very innovative ideas as to how we can support our local businesses because they are so valuable to us. So you're going to hear later on in the council discussion more about the levers and things that we're going to do with what we can do with the streets and the roads and stuff. But I would just like to say, in terms of your question of how can we incentivise people to shop local, that we are actually at the moment working on a campaign, which we hope we're working in conjunction with our stakeholders and businesses to do a borough-wide campaign about come and shop local, keep it local, spend your money with your local businesses. And we're also exploring various apps and reward schemes that do exist, because I think you're right, those are good things to look at. And I was excited to find one scheme that actually has been newly developed by a member of the North Kensington community, which is looking at making deliveries from local shops to our residents by electric bikes. So we're helping a pilot of that one. And I think it's exactly the sort of thing that that we need. So thank you very much, Ellie. We're with you, and we want to do all we can do to support our high streets.
Thank you. The Labour Group, please. Anybody wish to? Councillor Mason.
Aye, Councillor Pat Mason. Thank you, Ellie. Good question. There are lots of questions like this coming in these days. How to get people to? I mean, this is what a bugbear of mine about people shopping online. Of course, it clogs up the streets with delivery vans and so on. But they complain to me about the fact that local shops are disappearing when they need to go to them, laundries, etc. And I say, well, you need to use them. You use them or lose them. And both parties in the council have been running shop local campaigns for quite a number of years now, and along with the pedestrianisation stuff that we talked about earlier, and we need to together as traders, shopkeepers, and local residents decide and take ownership of what is happening in our shopping areas, because it's happened in other countries where they've had similar problems. And if we take ownership to redesign our shopping areas, then perhaps we can, as a community in each area, get to know and shop in our local shops. I don't actually agree that shopping local for fresh food can be more expensive. Of course, I live off the Portobello and Goulburn market, where you can go in the afternoon or sometimes in the evenings, and when they're trying to sell off, things get cheaper. At the end of the day, they will sell £2 of fruit for the price of one, and so on. But I've tested this one over the years, and you're right, there are some goods that are cheaper in the market, but there are also quite a lot of similarities between the prices of local shops that are trying to compete with supermarkets. So I think we all need to take ownership of this. The more we shop online, the less money goes into our communities, and the less these big companies are paying, as we know, less and less or no tax. They are unfairly competing against local shops, opening up local this and local that stores. So we as local residents and the council need to decide what happens in our areas. Otherwise, we will soon have no local shops. they are really, really, really struggling, and they will be struggling for some time to come. But unless we, people go to the supermarket and they'll decide to buy everything there. I don't do that. I buy X things in the supermarket, and I go to the fishmonger, I go to the baker, I go to different places to buy different items that, yes, I could have bought in Tesco's or in Sainsbury's, but actually I choose to support my local shops as well, spread it around. So this is up to all of us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Campbell, your hand came up. Did you want to comment? No. Okay. Councillor Campbell, you're speaking, but you're muted.
It says that I'm not muted on mine. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Thank you.
Did you want to say something on that? Or?
No, I didn't,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Let's move on then to question 5. It's a very short statement, but I think hopefully there is a question in here, and it's submitted by Lisa Collins. Proposed communal fire doors installation review concerns unsafe for certain building blocks. I shall repeat that again. Proposed communal fire doors installation review concerns unsafe for certain building blocks. Who would like to respond to that? Councillor Taylor-Smith?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, and also thank you for the question, albeit it's rather a brief one. I think just to say that we immediately instigated a programme of replacing all of our fire doors after the tragedy of Grenfell to ensure that we achieve the highest possible standards of fire safety in our homes. And we commissioned Girder fire doors, as they're recognised as being a leading provider. And so far we've installed 700. We've got a further 1,300 which are waiting for delivery, which has obviously been hampered by COVID-19. And then we have another 1,100 under consultation, which leaves a further 2,000 till next year. And the important thing is maintaining this programme during the lockdown, and credit goes to both our residents and our officers in doing that. And we installed, I think, about 170 with a model form of consent, whereby if somebody was self-isolating or uncomfortable with any works happening, we deferred any work. And just to, again, report that we are committed to ensure that our houses are safe. And I'm also very pleased to state that we're now the only council in the United Kingdom to have an accreditation for BAFE SP205, which is for fire risk assessments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Labour Group.
Councillor Pat Mason, I think it's me. The question didn't specifically say so, but I thought this question might have related to works happening during the COVID-19 pandemic. The question didn't say that, but because I've dealt with various cases where residents on lots of different landlords have complained about various works landlords are carried out during the COVID period, I thought this might have related to that it might be unsafe for fire door replacement works to happen. But the question didn't specifically say that, but I thought that's what it meant. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I thought that's what it meant. But there was a lot of concern, not just with KNC, but with other landlords, as I say, who were carrying out works that me and other councillors had to go and ask them why they're doing it, etc. So I don't know if that's related to this question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, perhaps we'll be able to speak to Lisa Collins and try and answer a question in more detail later. Thank you. So that we've got the final question now from Suzanne Press. I want enforcement officers able to visit building sites. They are wearing masks in their own lives when shopping. They can wear masks to building sites too. It's a statement rather than a question, but is that Councillor Tharcisius? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's an important statement, and I've confirmed what I had already understood from in a conversation with our Director of Planning again today, that all of our planning enforcement officers do and will continue to have the appropriate equipment, gloves and other things to go out and perform site visits. So I'm happy to provide reassurance on that.
Thank you very much. Anybody from the Labour Group?
Councillor Pat Mason. I mean, you can go past any building site, and I've got quite a few in my area, and you can see there's no social distancing, and there's certainly no masks, and there's hardly ever any gloves. So Of course, a lot of residents would complain to us, and presumably they've complained to the council as well about building sites. But of course, the government have allowed construction to continue during the pandemic on the basis that they will carry out, or they'll do it commensurate with the social distancing rules. But of course, you only have to go past some of the works on building sites and on streets, I have to say. So some of it may be ours and some of it are Thames Water and so on, where you can see there's no real social distancing or gloves or masks or anything else. I haven't seen any construction workers wearing masks at all that I can remember right now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much. So that ends our public questions, and I'd like again to thank the people who submitted questions. Very good range of topics there, and I would encourage members of the public to continue to submit their questions. So thank you very much indeed. Move on to item 5, petitions. Do members have any petitions to present? I'm not hearing any, so I shall move on now to item 6. I now call on the leader to address the meeting and Councillor Mason to respond.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Kamali here.
Yeah.
Thank you. In accordance with Standing Order 42, I wish to move that Standing Order 30 be suspended this evening to allow the leader and Councillor Mason up to 10 minutes each for their speeches.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
I second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lowry. Does the council agree to that? I declare that agreed, and therefore invite the leader now to speak up to 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Good. Mr. Mayor, thank you. 3 years on, I still find our 72-second silence very poignant, as it reminds us why we're all here today. And I'm going to keep my remarks very brief, to really allow as much time as possible to get to the debates listed on our running order. I'll update the Council on the latest developments in our battle with COVID-19, including social distancing, council services and measures in place for the return of our hospitality sector on the 4th of July. I'll also use my time to speak about the Black Lives Matter movement that the world is now experiencing following the brutal killing of George Floyd. And I'll talk about this council's firm stance against racism, brutality, and prejudice of any kind. Mr. Mayor, things are changing rapidly once again. Yesterday, the Prime Minister announced a number of measures to get the UK economy moving. Here in KNC, we're supportive of those measures. Our key industries in the borough revolve around hospitality: pubs, restaurants, hotels, bars, shops, and retails. And my message tonight is this: we are open for business, but we are ready to respond. The Council's leadership team and officers across the Council are laser focused on protecting lives and protecting livelihoods. And so we must all stay alert and prepared. If the UK sees an outbreak of the disease in an area, local authorities are now tasked with more and more of the response to those outbreaks. We have one hand on the handbrake that Boris spoke about yesterday. The months of July, August and September will be absolutely crucial. We must above all protect our residents and be ready to move backwards as well as forwards. We want to be the safest borough to visit as well as the most exciting. And we are, of course, asking the government to continue to provide funding as well as lobbying for changes to laws to help our businesses open and operate safely. Mr. Mayor, this borough has stood up to COVID-19 and we have shown patience, fortitude and displayed what this borough is all about. We look out for each other, we care about each other, and we're working together. And thanks to the efforts of our residents and those who work here, our borough is one of the safest in the UK. This borough has seen one death since June the 15th. But, one is too many, and this single digit represents a family dealing with pain and grief. Too many have lost their lives through these difficult months to this terrible virus. Mr. Mayor, many things remain uncertain, and we face many new challenges. As I've said, lockdown can go backwards as well as forwards. And some of our challenges will be logistical and some financial. The Council is already forecasting a shortfall of over £30 million. But we must not lose sight of the priorities. We all have a renewed social responsibility. We must care for the person next to us more than we care for ourselves. We must shop locally, help our businesses out, more space for markets, longer opening hours, extra cycling and walking provision. And we continue to make sure grants and support are available to businesses who are hit the hardest. And measures are underway to encourage people to Bute Street, Pavilion Road, Portobello and Golborne Markets, King Street, Sloane Square, High Street, Kensington. The way Londoners move around our city is changing. The tube is out of bounds, and so we need alternatives to help our high streets flourish. And more is to come. We're working on a summer trading policy, which will see spaces given to restaurants, pubs and cafes, so they can serve outside in a safe environment. We're finding new ways to engage with residents digitally and bring vital services back. And when the time comes for our museums and cultural sector to open its doors, the Council will be here to help them. Mr. Mayor, we are protecting lives and we are protecting livelihoods. Mr. Mayor, COVID-19 has raised a truth that might be uncomfortable for many. It has peeled back the lid on the prejudice many communities in our borough and around the UK face every day. It is a categoric fact that Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities are disproportionately affected by this virus. We know this is linked to long-term and systemic problems with inequality, opportunities and access to health and support. It has to change, and we will be making sure that we are part of the change, indeed driving that change. I've watched the events in the USA and in turn in the UK over the last few weeks. George Floyd's murder has rightly drawn attention to the issue of racial injustice around the world. Here in London Centre, it runs deeper. We must pay attention to inequality and injustice, and we must oppose racism in all its forms. Let's remember, amidst the protests and the media coverage, people are saying, Black lives matter. They are not saying only Black lives matter, but Black lives are in danger and have been for generations. We have to recognise that. So let's not amplify division because we all lose. Let us all work together.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I call now upon the Councillor Mason to reply, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Campbell says that the Council opposes racism in all its forms, and the Council will always challenge racism wherever we see it, the leader told us in the latest edition of North Kensington News. And it's instructive to see how far we have come and how far we must go. And we will see if her word is true in the coming months when the Tutu Foundation report into institutionalised racism at the Westway Trust over the decades is finally released. Of course, the Trust and the Council travelled the same road together since the Trust was established until recent years. So the report is going to make uncomfortable reading for some people. George Floyd, that was a murder that happened right in front of us. And of course, the Black Lives Matters and the activists in the US said and told us, and not just now, and not just before, and not just after the George Floyd murder, that this sort of thing has been going on for decades and decades and decades, and it's only because social media, the advent of mobile phones and cameras, that we can actually see it now. But they have been. This is what we have been experiencing for decades. And when I first became a member of this council, my first experience of the council's idea at that time of challenging racism came about 3 months after I was elected in 1991. We had the South Africa anti-apartheid campaign going on. Sus was happening on the streets. There were black youth getting alleged to be beaten up at Notting Hill Police Station. There was a pretty dreadful situation happening in Notting Hill and North Kensington. And I proposed a motion in the interest of the sensitivity of BAME residents, asking the Royal Borough Mayor to withdraw an invitation to the South African ambassador to visit the town hall at the height, as I say, of the anti-apartheid campaign to end white minority rule. And this was at a time when Nelson Mandela, later to become president of South Africa, was still incarcerated in Robben Island. And I suggested that invitation should be withdrawn. And I was castigated. I was attacked for attacking the mayoralty. And of course, the council majority voted against, and none of them cared about how the BAME residents felt then. So it's and over the decades we have had the Kelso Cochrane scenario. Kelso Cochrane killed in 1959. We had the various race relations acts that followed that were meant to stop these sorts of attacks, killings happening in Britain. Anyone who wants to find out what happened with the Kelso Cochrane trial investigation can read Mark Olden's excellent book Murder in Notting Hill. And if you read it, it's almost an identikit for the incompetent investigation after the Stephen Lawrence killing in 1993, where the killers in both cases went free at that point, and only 2 were convicted in 2011 in terms of Stephen in terms of Stephen Lawrence. So as David Lammy said recently, I think we've had about 5 major reports, as well as the Macpherson report after the Stephen Lawrence killing back in 1993. We're knee deep in reports, and actually what we need is implementation. And I think that's partly what Black Lives Matters is about, that we will have another report here or in the US, and it will get kicked into church. And I, of course, support the Black Lives Matters demonstrations, as I hope that we all do. But it seems that rooting out racism from the institution of society is much more difficult than actually saying the words, because many of us who have been around a long time have seen the symbols of doing it, but not the actual. The racism is in the fact that if you are BME, you're less likely to get a job, you're more likely to be in prison. We know all the facts now, and everybody knows all the facts all the way up to the top, but nobody is actually going to make the change necessary to stop these dreadful array of statistics that we see, all the way from people being discriminated against in the job market because of the colour of their skin, the religion, so on, all the way down to the prisons, the young people. I mean, in recent weeks, we have had a really bad spate of stabbings and some deaths on our streets involving young people. The gangs are busy with their drug business once again. I aspire to a society where we will not be looking at people's skin or skin color or religion or anything else about them. We will just know them as somebody who is my friend, who is the shopkeeper, somebody who is whatever name they are. We need to get rid of all that. Until we get rid of all that, we're going to be in this situation. Grenfell. Well, we've just passed the third anniversary. Like COVID-19, we have people grieving still 3 years afterwards, as if it happened yesterday. They're still looking for justice. They still want justice. The people who have died because of COVID, I think it's over 100 in the borough, and so there must be a lot of people grieving. We've still got many people visiting food banks. We've got the small business problems that we've all talked about. Grants to small businesses. Well, this is really an issue, and I've been raising this with Councillor Taylor Smith as well. I go around and talk to a lot of small businesses on this, and they say, well, of course, some of us got the government grant. We've been using that to pay the bills. It's not making us a profit. We're actually paying the bills with that, and of course, when that runs out, then we're going to be in some trouble. So COVID, we will have to move into recovery. We have to imagine all these shopping areas that everyone has talked about in the questions. We need to get business back up. And the Grenfell inquiry will restart possibly in July. And we're going to hopefully move towards getting some justice for those 72 people who died so atrociously in that tower in June the 14th, 3 years ago. So I do hope that it's not another 3 or 10 years before the government really makes another Grenfell impossible, and that's not happening at the moment. We saw what happened at the inquiry when it was sitting, and those companies and individuals were not thinking, how shall we work to ensure that we don't contribute to another Grenfell? No, they were trying to cover themselves from liability. With the inquiry suspended for several weeks while they sought immunity from the government for anything they might say in the inquiry. So it looks like we're going to be dragging the serious radical reform of building and fire regulations is needed in this country, kicking and screaming into the new government century. And I hope, I'm not terribly hopeful that the construction industry will not water down and lobby away real change that the government may or may not want to introduce. COVID-19, I hope that some of the serious commentators I hear that talk about a second and third wave, I hope that will not happen. I mean, I certainly hope that will not happen, because if that happens, then we're going to be in trouble, and the stats are not great on that that we hear. So we, as the Labour Opposition Group, will do everything in our power to both get justice for those people at Grenfell and support the people who want to get justice for them, and to work as hard as we can to do our part to help our residents and businesses and our areas to overcome and recover from and reimagine as we recover from the COVID-19, which I hope we will do soon. We will do our part. We have been doing our part during the pandemic, and that's what we'll continue to do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I now move to item 7, order of business. In accordance with standing order rules, I rule that the order of business shall be as printed in the agenda. The order of debate of motions will be varied, and I shall deal with that with the order when we reach the motions. So item number 8, reports from leadership team. There are no reports from leadership team to this meeting. Item 9, there are no reports of council subcommittees to this meeting. Item 10, there are no matters referred by scrutiny committee to this meeting. So move to item 11, questions to lead members. Question 1, I call upon Councillor Atkinson to read his question, which is printed in the agenda. Councillor Atkinson. Councillor Atkinson.
Right, can you hear me now?
I can, yes. And can you put your camera on as well if you want to be seen, please?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you.
The question. Since the council unanimously agreed on the importance of retaining permanent full-time beds at the St Charles Hospice, what actions have been taken and progress made by the council in retaining and improving all the vital services at our local hospice?
Thank you. And I call upon Councillor Addenbrooke to answer the question, please. Councillor Addenbrooke? Councillor Addenbrooke, we're not hearing you. Councillor Addenbrooke, we cannot hear you. Have you got your computer on, your mic on mute?
Mr. Mayor,
yeah.
Mr. Mayor, she is trying to join the conversation. She's having issues with unmuting her microphone. I don't know if the officers would be able to unmute on her behalf.
I'm looking at the officer to see if we can do that.
Unfortunately, we can only mute. We can't unmute.
Okay.
But if she just slows down, let it just catch up with itself. It should be okay in a second. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I had exactly the same problem. I think it's the computer's overheating.
Right. It's.
In fact, I had to switch to off my office computer onto an iPad 2 minutes before I spoke because I just couldn't get the button to work. So maybe Sarah is having the same problem.
To any councillors that are having trouble with their microphone sticking, can you please try pressing Control-Shift-M on your keyboard? This may help with the blockages on your screen.
Could you just repeat that, please?
Of course. Try pressing Control, bottom left corner, Shift, just above the Control key, and M, letter M for melon, all at the same time, and this should unblock your mute.
Okay, I don't think we're having much success there. Can I suggest, Councillor Adam, that you carry on trying to connect, and we'll move on to the next item and then come back to your answer. Councillor Atkinson, is that acceptable?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you. So we move to item 12. Does any member wish to raise a matter under Standing Order 11 and speak for up to 2 minutes?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Thaxter, you have your 2 minutes.
Well, can I do it on yours? The entire Windrush arrived in Timbury in 22nd of June 1948. 1,220 migrants arrived from the Caribbean, responding to all the calls from the government to assist. The Windrush was followed by many other ships bringing people from the British Caribbean colonies to what they know as their motherland, Britain. We now know this generation as the Windrush. We cannot underestimate the huge contribution this generation made in Britain. Even though they face many racism barriers and were treated unfairly, today, Lapworth could not have been the same without the contribution of the Windrush generation and their descendant. They paved the way for many organizations in the local area. They started the Notting Hill Housing Trust, now known as the Notting Hill Genesis, the North Kensington Law Centre, the Westway Housing Trust, now based in Kensal Road. They also initiated other community essential services like the Pepper Pot, recreational facilities and festivals such as Unity Restaurants, Under the Westway and Notting Hill Carnival. The Windrush generation actually built the building under the Westway on the voluntary basis. This was subsequently taken over by the borough and became known as the Amenity Trust and is now known as the Westway Development Trust. This is because they had an apprenticeship ethos, which dictates that if they pass on their skills to their younger children, so apprenticeship could include building, mechanics, carpentry, and sewing classes. In addition to these initiatives and ideas, the current services have been attributed to Westway Development Trust and include the supplementary school and adult learning development and sports centre further beyond Bramley Road, where all pinch and pilfered from people of the Windrush generation. Funding given to those initiatives were derived from the community onto what they now know. There is now a whole industry which has been taken to create jobs and business premises for a certain section of society and people with their hard work has made impossible, and they've been undermined and ignored. I'm asking what the council is going to do to ensure that resources meant for British Caribbean people, such as reparation, for example, the Lloyds Bank and the company funding and compensation, are used for them and not diverted onto any other resources of people who are not now enjoying the yield of the hard work of the Windrush generation and their descendant, who continue to work on the ground in North Kensington, thanklessly and unrecognised.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Addenbrooke, are you able to join us?
I am, Mr. Mayor. I apologise. I was thrown out of the meeting, but I'm now back.
Okay, good to have you back. Do you want to answer Councillor Atkinson's question then, please?
Sure. So, Councillor Atkinson, thank you for your question. The Council remains concerned about the proposed closure of the Pembridge End-of-Life Care Unit, and these concerns have been communicated to West London CCG and also to the North West London CCG as commissioners at various meetings. On the 20th of January, Councillor Freeman chaired a public event, including commissioners and providers, to enable residents to publicly air their views, ask questions and seek a response from the West London CCG. This event was very well attended, and it was made clear to the commissioners and providers that we were against the closure. And I'm sure you will remember we both attended a review of palliative care services in the borough held by the CCG on the 9th of March. In March, we responded to the North West London consultation, asking them to reopen the palliative care beds and to reinstate and invest in bereavement and carer support services, giving our residents choice for their end-of-life care and support to their family and friends. Since that meeting and letter, the NHS has been focused on responding to a level 4 health emergency. And so for the last 12 weeks, the beds at Pembridge have been recommissioned by the North West London CCG as step-down beds to support hospital discharges for COVID-positive patients. During this period, the Community Palliative Care Service has continued to support residents in their homes or other settings. West London CCG has confirmed the review into palliative care has now been paused and that no decisions have been made. However, the recent development of the North West London out-of-hospital care plan in preparation for any second wave of the pandemic and for longer-term care recognises the need to ensure services are able to respond quickly and also consistently in meeting population health needs. As such, we have requested clarification on the consultation process and also to rethink provision to ensure local end-of-life care needs are also understood and met. As I have said before, I have personal experience of supporting my mother through palliative care, and I'm therefore keen to continue to work with you, our colleagues in the Chamber and officers to ensure that our residents' needs are robustly put to the CCG commissioners and their providers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, you may have a supplementary or a question if you wish. Councillor Atkinson, do you wish to ask a supplementary question?
Can you hear me?
I can just now. Yes.
Right, let me try again.
No, you're there. Keep going. Councillor Atkinson, we can't hear you.
Right, let me try.
We can now. We can now. Keep going, please.
Right. Does she agree that the more than ever we need 24-hour hospice beds? And I want to ask her, how is the council going to help galvanise the support and campaigning by our residents? Will we provide the lead in the retention and indeed expansion of our hospice?
Thank you, Councillor Addenbrooke.
So, Councillor Atkinson, at the moment, everybody in the council is concentrating on the response to COVID-19, and I think you will appreciate why we're doing that. I mean, obviously, this is a really important issue, and I think once we can start talking to the CCGs, the commissioners, about this again, there will be a whole review of what is available. And it is really important to us that the right care is available to our residents going forward.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we now move to item 13, motions. Members will see that we have 7 motions printed in the agenda. I understand that Councillor Woodger wishes to withdraw motion 1 on schools. Is that correct, Councillor Woodger?
Yes, that's correct. I wish to withdraw that motion on schools.
Okay. So does the council approve the withdrawal of this motion? If I don't hear anything to the contrary, I will accept that as agreement.
Yes, agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also intend to vary the order of debates of the motion so that motion 4 on business support is debated first, followed by motion 6 on COVID-19 and motion 5 on schools. The motions on modern slavery, short-term lets and Black Lives Matter will follow in the order they were submitted if the time allows. Any motions not debated tonight will be put on the agenda for the meeting on the 22nd of July. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
I will take no dissent as an agreement. Agreed. Thank you very much. So when it's time to vote on the motions and amendments, I will ask the whips to indicate which way their party colleagues are voting. I shall then give members an opportunity to say if they are not voting in line with their whips. And I will also ask Councillor Palmer and Councillor Wade individually to indicate which way they are voting. So therefore now call on the motion on business support. Members will see that we have an amendment has been submitted. So I now ask Councillor Bennett to formally move the motion, standing his name, and Councillor Weston to formally second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bennett here. I formally move the motion.
And Councillor Wason formally moves to second.
Councillor Wason, thank you. Councillor Bennett to speak, up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to start by very quickly recognising the unprecedented and extraordinary array of measures that both the government and our council have implemented in these times. I don't want to go into too much detail on it because I know Catherine's going to talk about it in more detail later, but I'm just sure all members will join me in registering my admiration for our officers who have worked tirelessly to carry out those measures and distribute those funds to ensure the survival of our businesses and many jobs across the borough. Mr. Mayor, we're now approaching a crucial time in the lives of our businesses in this borough. Obviously, many shops have now reopened, and we know on 4th of July that many bars and restaurants and to some of us, most important of all, barbers and hairdressers will reopen on the 4th of July. And I think on a personal level, first of all, Mr. Mayor, we must join the sentiments of the Prime Minister a couple of days ago in accepting our patriotic duty to go to the pub on the 4th of July. But of course, as councillors, our duty does go beyond the personal. And we have a very great responsibility to our businesses in this very difficult period. I think as we look across the borough, we'd agree that the high streets and businesses in this borough are part of what makes it so special, from the household names of Kings Road, Kensington High Street, Portobello Road, to the smaller but no less important roads like All Saints Road, Hollywood Road in my own ward, and Ledbury Road, all fantastic places to be and shop and eat and drink, all places I'm very fond of. And I do think we have to accept that it is the prosperity and vibrancy, and in some cases just the continued existence of these businesses and high streets that is at stake now when we consider what our action should be. And thus I think we should agree that no scheme is too ambitious and no idea too fantastic to be seriously considered at this time. Now, I know officers and lead members are all already working on a large number of measures, and I don't have time, of course, to mention all of them, but there are a few things that I want to touch on that I think are very important. And if I raise points that are mentioned by the opposition amendment, I make no apology, for they are great points, and the large majority of which I wholeheartedly agree with. Starting off with planning measures, I do think we need to look and work with the government at making it much easier to convert use class. I think none of us know coming out of this crisis what the change in demand will be for anything from sort of physical banking services, office use, gyms, restaurants, estate agents, florists. I mean, they could increase in demand, decrease. We really have no idea. And we need to be open to that. If a restaurant, I read recently about a restaurant that over the course of the crisis had become a flower store, and why not? We should absolutely be allowing that to happen as easily as possible. If a bookshop wants to open as a bar in the evenings to supplement its income, and it's on a street where there are already bars, you know, why should we stand in their way? And I think if adapting to changing demands is too costly, too time-consuming, or simply impossible for our businesses, then the result will be boarded up shops and lonely high streets. And I will just mention very briefly that we already have precedent there for this, and we know St Quintin and the Woodlands Neighbourhood Plan has led the way in this already.
1 minute.
Thank you. There's obviously a number of licensing measures we need to consider as well, and I see no reason why this borough can't lead the way in the al fresco revolution that is so talked about, and we need to seriously consider how we make things much simpler, easier, and in many cases automatic to get tables and chairs licenses or extend licensing hours. In terms of transport, we also need to look at a wider array of schemes to make it easier to walk and cycle around the borough. And already in our ward, Redcliffe, we're looking at 2 schemes to widen pavements and introduce shared space zones. I'll just finish very quickly, Mr. Mayor, by saying the opposition amendment has much to commend it. But I think it falls into the trap of being a little too prescriptive. And if I was to pick out one thing, they talk about the indefinite extension of free parking for NHS workers. Well, I think that's been a fantastic scheme, but we need to now consider the impact of the reduction to 1 metre of the social distancing on public transport. And I'm sure none of us want to incur the wrath of the Mayor of London by encouraging people to travel more by car where they could travel by public transport. And the absolute last thing we want to do is to be seen to be deliberately subverting or undermining this recent increase of the congestion charge. So I commend this motion wholeheartedly, as is, to members. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Weston. Do you want to speak up to 5 minutes?
Yes, I would. Turn my screen on. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, I would like to second this very relevant and urgent motion that Councillor Bennett has put forward. And obviously, in particular, his reference to hairdressers, which we're all in dire need of.
Some of you.
As Councillor Fawkes will be updating us on the progress the council has made, I'd like to start by sharing some of my own personal experiences of lockdown as a father, a resident, an entrepreneur, and a business owner. Let me be absolutely clear, and to use a wartime terminology, I have had a good lockdown and am in no way moaning about my lot, as I can only imagine how devastating this lockdown has been on some in our society. The lonely, the vulnerable, those struggling with mental health, abusive relationships, and those, of course, sinking deeper and deeper into financial stress. I was trained as an accountant to analyze risk. As an entrepreneur, I know the buck really stops with you, and it can give you an innate sense of what may go wrong. I ran a business through the global financial crisis, and I know what can happen to businesses through no fault of their own. It does not matter how hard you work or how quickly you innovate. Through factors beyond your control, the carpet is swept from beneath your feet. The global financial crisis was a walk in the park compared to COVID-19 and the worldwide lockdowns that have ensued. We could see the warning signs coming from China in January. Something was on the horizon, and many business owners scrambled to put scenario planning into place. But the speed and spread of this enigmatic and deadly virus caught us all by surprise. What has made this crisis particularly hard to deal with for many of us, as not only were we dealing with a crisis sweeping through the world of business, but we were dealing with that whilst being locked down with our beloved children. With 3 children under the age of 7, I don't know which was more brutal of these factors. The stress that I and many other entrepreneurs, business owners, employees, landlords, to mention a few, was simply intolerable. Never in my life have I experienced anything like it. With bills to pay, staff to look after, homeschooling sapping your Wi-Fi bandwidth, and the government, understandably, scrambling to find solutions. The uncertainty and the abyss was very, very real. Businesses that I'd helped build over decades and paid out regular dividends suddenly needed cash injections. Startup businesses failed fast. Tenants defaulted, investment funds were closed for disbursements, currencies falling, and the stock market was plummeting. Suddenly, not only was your income dropping towards zero, but also your assets that had been so carefully diversified, they had become unsellable. Business has been all about cash burn, negotiating with landlords, paying salaries, cutting costs, and reducing risks. As I say, the stress was intolerable, and this is the stress that our RBKC business owners would have felt over the last 3 months. Slowly, in some aspects very slowly, things started to improve. The government waded in with the furlough scheme, CBILS, VAT relief, rent relief. Liabilities were quantified. Children got used to homeschooling. You started discovering and admiring a new sense of community that had sprung up and took joy in delivering food and prescriptions to your vulnerable neighbours. I've even managed to dye all our white clothes pink in the wash twice, although living in a household of girls, this was not entirely the end of the world. We must also not just look at the COVID crisis through our own lens, but also have a realization that lockdowns in RBKC and the UK have serious impacts on the rest of the world. I heard on the radio this week the CEO of Oxfam said one of his staff members got a text message from a taxi driver in Nairobi. The message said, "This lockdown is going to starve us before the virus infects us." Now the dust is settling and we pray for no second wave, we need to take stock. What will businesses do differently in the future, and what lessons we have learned? Businesses will hold more cash and invest less. They'll employ less people. People have found out that commuting is a waste of time for many. We will continue to shop more online. We have discovered that life is cheaper in a lockdown, but this does mean we'll spend less on entertaining in future. Rents will go down. Businesses will have to innovate to operate. There has been a tsunami of support from Her Majesty's government. The magic money tree has been shaken, and we, our children and grandchildren, will be paying this back for the rest of our lives. I've seen the beauty of furlough in action, how it has saved jobs, but we need to wean ourselves off this drug. This is where the council must step in at a local level. After so much work already, we must redouble our efforts, encourage residents to shop locally, not solely online. We need to encourage visitors back to the borough to shop because of the experience of shopping rather than the need. We need to encourage visitors back to our museums, our parks and our restaurants, and importantly, to drink vertically. On glorious summer days like today, we need the sunlight to kill this virus, but encourage us to get out there, exercise and feel positive about this wonderful borough. Mr. Mayor, I encourage my fellow members to support this motion.
Thank you very much. I now call on the amendment. Councillor Press to formally move the amendment and Councillor Al-Naghi to second it. Councillor Press?
I'm happy to move this motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Naghi?
I'm happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Press to speak to the amendment for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. Thank you.
Great.
And see you.
Excellent. During lockdown, Mr. Mayor, I've been catching up with the series Mad Men. And as I read this motion, I wondered if it's Councillor Bennett or Councillor Wason who is the madman, in the best sense of the skilled advertising executive, behind this motion. It's the kind of promotional piece and the kind of advertising copy that Don Draper would be proud of. Who can object to encouraging residents to shop locally, to reinvigorating our great high streets, or to working with stakeholders? But that's all this motion in its current form is, a press relief with some vague visions. The only commitment stated in the motion is this could include more greening, improvement to the streetscape, and making it easier and safer for people to get there on foot or bicycle. Could, why not will? I appreciate the detail and can agree with a lot of what was said in Councillor Bennett and Wason's speech. But where's the detail in this motion for residents and businesses? We've had 3 months of lockdown to anticipate this, when surely not all our highways, licensing, markets, community safety, economic development and environmental health officers were redeployed to the hub. No, most were working from home and outside. Where are the worked up plans and commitments our residents can expect after 12 weeks to consider what the relaxation of lockdown would look like? This is when those ambitious and innovative plans should have been bounced around. Councillor Falasitis and Fawkes noted tonight their total support for pedestrianised shopping streets and the recovery of our local shopping centres and world-class markets. So why weren't officers instructed weeks ago to develop post-lockdown recovery plans? I know we're all working within the confused policies and last-minute U-turns and decisions of Boris Johnson's administration, but I think that's something we can expect and have to build on. On a recent COVID-19 impact programme, an NHS health specialist and economist both agreed that one positive result of the pandemic is that things that used to take years have taken sometimes days or weeks. Unfortunately, I don't see the evidence in Kensington and Chelsea. Hammersmith and Fulham and Westminster are as ever ahead of us as they've arranged street closures and open-air dining in key restaurants, streets and destinations. An officer with highways told me, Mr. Ware, that the reason Westminster could arrange road closures and on-street dining quickly was that these shopping and dining centres were already BIDs, Business Improvement Districts, a business support initially created by Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London. For the past 3 years, we've been trying to get council support for Portobello and Goulburn markets becoming creative enterprise zones or a BID, and apply for funding via the Mayor's Good Growth Fund. There are a number of GLA funding and support schemes for local businesses, the latest being Pay It Forward for local businesses that need cash injections, that this council, given its large budget deficit, needs to engage in. Yet this motion doesn't even mention the Mayor. We've had to insert that the GLA and the Mayor of London come into this amendment as stakeholders. I know that the Mayor of London is severely cash-strapped given the lack of current government support and the rather partisan political approach Boris Johnson has taken.
1 minute, Councillor Press, please.
Thank you, to his COVID report, but surely Councillor Bennett and Councillor Wason are not allowing their politics to disadvantage our residents and businesses. My summation is that Councillor El Naji will speak to some of the specific commitments in the amendment and which the Labour group and residents expect to see in the motion after a 3-month lockdown and planning time. We recognise that many of these initiatives are already in hand and that the lead members for Transport Environment are working very hard to have these in place. But given that this motion has taken precedence over a motion on modern slavery and Black Lives Matter, then it should be demonstrating its importance and specific policy directions and commitments to local businesses and workers with a target date. So we urge you all, please, to include our amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nagy, do you wish to speak? Councillor Nagy?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Sorry, I clicked several times on my unmute and it's gone into...
Here, you're with us now.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, just to add flesh to the bone of this motion, that's why we suggested these amendments and to experience the effects of COVID on our local businesses is it has more or less double effect, especially in my ward, Nottingdale. During this COVID crisis, I went around some local businesses just to see how they are operating, what kind of challenges and barriers they have in place. And just at this moment in time, let me thank you and lead member for Skills and Enterprise, that you visited my ward recently and you had that first-hand experience of what I supported right across from December when that business invited us to see how they can turn an entrepreneurship from a simple garage. Which I hope you can share that, but I'm not going to mention that business. However, what we are seeing in these amendments is the accepting all the theoretical background on what's being proposed, and then putting an action plan in place for the council to be more proactive in supporting our businesses. For example, first-hand experience, local businesses who are supporting the NHS workers and the frontline services. I've seen the ticket from one of traffic wardens on a one doctor car who was trying to get his car serviced at one of the local garages. And this is when I plead with the, I've sent an email saying that can we support our businesses who are providing first-hand, giving discount to NHS staff, as well as key workers. So this is one example. The other example, I visited one business as well. This is in discussing in details when I've seen a quiet risk, the way people are standing on the street, queuing to get access to that service. I spoke to the manager and she told me that where she lives in Brent, the council was very proactive in supporting their business, immediately responding to their need in providing safety barriers where people can queue and access the services needed in a very safe way. And that's exactly how, when I added these two elements at the end of, in the last of our amendments. So you can see that we have a lot of talk, but we need to follow these talks and these more or less statements into an active action plan in order for our council to be more proactive and be seen proactive by these business owners who are really struggling. And especially as a ward councillor for Nottingdale, I've seen the effects firsthand. Some businesses, they did not have time to apply for our funds. Some of them, they did not even know there is such a fund available. So forgive me, Mr. Mayor, I've been to the coffee shops, pharmacies, different diverse business environment. So I would like from our council to be more proactive in addressing the needs of our local business. And finally, I hope you enjoyed your drive.
I did indeed. Thank you very much. Very impressive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. So I now invite other members to speak up to 5 minutes on this motion. I've had list of speakers. Councillor Idris, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everyone. As Deputy Mayor, I had 3 causes to champion and shine a light on. I was fortunate to hold events for the B Superhighway and Loneliness and Isolation, where I shared my vision and hopefully started a conversation. The third is our high streets and how can we revive them. And although I researched the viability of my vision and formulated a possible way forward, I was unable to share any of it until now. Unlike some, I see people shopping attitude change as an opportunity and a possibility to use our high street differently. One obvious use is housing. We live in an island with limited land to build on. We love and cherish our green spaces, fields and forests, and of course, we don't want to spoil or lose them, and we shouldn't, because they serve more than beauty and our joy. They protect and sustain our environment and these great islands. We also don't care much for tall and bulky buildings. Therefore, it makes sense that some of the existing buildings, such as the ones in our high streets, should be used to fill the housing gap. The rest we can turn around by thinking outside the box. By being bold and innovative, we can have a different yet vibrant high street. Our Live, Work and Learn document points out that 52,000 of our residents daily travel to work outside the borough. I am sure among them we have doctors, lawyers, accountants, fashion designers, jewelers, architects, cosmetic surgeons, financiers, bankers, and many, many more professionals. Obviously, not all of them run their own businesses, but those who do, we have a duty to headhunt and encourage them to run their businesses from inside this borough. Just think about it. If only 5% of the 52,000 who daily leave this borough to go to work elsewhere have businesses in Mayfair, Savile Row, Fleet Street, the Docklands, or Harley Street, that is 2,600 businesses we can attract and bring to RBKC. By achieving this, those who visit or vacation in the borough and those who live here can conveniently have every treatment and service within the borough. This way, everybody gets to reduce travel time, stress, and cost, lower their carbon footprint, and rebuild the high streets of the future. We get vibrant high streets and more outsiders visiting for treatments and services. To realize this, we simply need to convince these businesses why it's better for them to bring their businesses to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And of course, review our own planning and licensing regulations to accommodate these new uses. But most of all, we need to be daring with our thinking and our vision for the future. And as Farmer Ray said, if you build it, they will come. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Durian, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd also like to speak in support of Councillor Bennett's motion. If I can just turn my camera on. Yes, in Earls Court, we've been starting up a business forum to try and address some of the shared challenges of businesses across different sectors, particularly in catering and hospitality, which of course have been badly hit by the coronavirus crisis. And one of the shared goals we had for the forum, and long before COVID-19 and lockdown, was to try and help promote the Earls Court area, make use of its recognised brand and the heritage to both to help existing businesses and attract new business to the area. And perhaps as a council, we could do something along the same lines for the borough as a whole, using our communications team, for instance, to kind of bang the drum for Kensington and Chelsea, both for our own residents and for visitors. I'd also note Councillor Press's comments on business improvement district. It's certainly something that we could be looking at for different areas, as long as it has the clear support of local businesses and clear spending objectives that will directly benefit the area. And to deliver on that business success, clearly, as others have mentioned, making sure our high streets are pleasant and safe places to visit is going to be more important than ever. The problem of air pollution, for instance, has certainly not gone away, despite possibly a brief respite during the early part of lockdown. And if I may conclude once again on an Earls Court perspective, I'd again call on TfL and the Mayor of London to engage with us to transform Earls Court Road as well for the benefit of both residents and our businesses. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chowan, do you wish to speak? Councillor Chowan?
Sorry. With the
Councillor Chowan, you're muted.
yeah, sorry, I'm with the
Councillor Chowan, I'll come back to you later. Councillor Hammond, do you wish to speak?
No, Mr. Mayor, I didn't list myself for this motion, but thank you for the offer. I can make something up.
Okay. Councillor Tharcitis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to respond to a few of the points that were in the Labour amendment, and to go to the heart of what Councillor Al-Naghi asked for was an active action plan. I think one of the best things that we did for active travel over the last few weeks, we announced an active travel plan in May, full of exciting walking and cycling measures like the closure of Portobello Road, the closure of Pavilion Road, new speed limits, and potentially even a low traffic neighbourhood, as opportunities for us to build on the better air quality and the healthier, more active lifestyles that we've seen in some ways during this tragic period. Turning to some of the more specific things in the amendment, I wanted to pick up on road closures because I've already mentioned a couple. We're looking at Bute Street. I note that All Saints Road is one of the things in the amendment. That's also something that I'm in close dialogue with Councillor Press and her ward colleagues about. It's something we're certainly open-minded about doing, but we've also got a whole raft of other areas across the borough that over the coming weeks we intend to bring forward as opportunities to deliver even more for our businesses and for all of our communities here in Kensington and Chelsea. When it comes to cycling lanes, that's always been a slightly vexed subject in certain thoroughfares in this borough, but we've also put together a really positive series of announcements on that front. Just last week, we said that we're going to be exploring the detailed design of a design for Kensington High Street, which I think is a huge step change for this borough. And at the same time, although we have some very real and very specific concerns about how the design might emerge on Chelsea Embankment, we note that TfL appear to be pursuing that, and that there are reports also of work on Westway, which we will clearly take a close interest in, and I will be grateful for interventions from members across the council chamber in due course on that. We've also talked about expediting planned cycleways and many other things. So I would just suggest that there is a very coherent plan for all of these things, that we look forward to working with members in the Labour group on measures, particularly in North Kensington, and that whilst there's much to commend in this amendment, I fear that, as others have already said, there are some elements that are just a bit tricky around parking, particularly where I think we need to show a bit more flexibility and a bit more pragmatism about the way forward.
Thank you. Councillor Wade.
I think that we do have a wonderful opportunity, because I think that life has changed for very many people during lockdown, and I think they've seen how the borough could work, and I think that very many wonderful ideas could come out and have been raised during discussion. I think there are a couple of points I would like to raise. I think communication for some small businesses have been poor. Therefore, they haven't been able to apply in time, and I think that we do have to try harder. I think the threshold for business rates has actually made it quite hard for some of the high street businesses to be eligible. So that's something, again, if you've got a key business on a high street which wouldn't qualify but is important to the profile and viability of the street, I think that there should be some consideration there. And now that we have the close to Hamish's, Malcolm's and my heart, the Earls Court regeneration, I think that we have to forward plan as to how we can develop a profile for existing Earls Court Road, business-wise, that is complementary to that will be appearing within the site. So it's not seen as a business entity separate from the Earls Court development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chowan, are you able to join us now?
Yes, I am, and thank you. Can you hear me now?
I can indeed, yes.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Great, thank you. Well, apologies, my mic failed earlier. I could hear the conversation, the comments that Councillor Thalasitis made. But I just wanted to just comment that I'm grateful to Councillor Bennett for bringing this motion to the Chamber, and I've listened to the debate with great attention, and I've also listened to the business owners in my ward, Queensgate ward. We have many excellent retail and service businesses in the ward. Some have recently benefited from the positive outcomes of licensing to create outdoor tables and chair space. But first, I'd just like to say Councillor Bennett highlighted 4 main packages of support available from the government in the form of business rate relief, bounce back loans, furlough schemes and grants. These have helped approximately 15,000 businesses, I believe, in our borough, and that have had to change in these difficult circumstances. They have been invaluable means of support. Obviously, businesses can't apply for multiple relief, so that's where some of the problems may lie. In particular, the officers and the leadership team have worked across portfolio, which I've noticed, in a collaborative way to reimagine the support to protect our livelihoods whilst protecting the lives. Councillor Thalasitis illustrated this in his response to Tom Mawson's first public question, but also in his comments earlier when I couldn't comment myself. He has also started creating more space for pedestrians and cyclists, particularly at the north end of my ward. So I'm grateful for this. More specifically about businesses, I'm grateful to the Member of Skills and Enterprise, Councillor Folkes, for listening to the needs of our businesses and self-employed people right from the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. And this is important because this was done well before the main effects were affecting other parts of London. Councillor Folkes facilitated the suspension of rent invoicing for council commercial and waste services, as well as other businesses. She has also informed us about available benefits and licensing support. Finally, I think we've already mentioned this, we all have a part to play in revitalising our local economy and can do this by ensuring that we support all our local businesses and the way we grant our planning and licenses for new forms of business in the in Kensington, especially health-related businesses. So I support the motion as amended. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm just going to take another couple of speakers, and I'm going to ask Councillor Press to sum up the amendment, then Councillor Folkes to respond as lead member. But Councillor Kamali, you wanted to make a contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think my first contribution should be to comment on Mr. Max's final comment there, that he's supporting the motion as amended. What I would say is that one of the benefits...
Sorry, can I just say, I said as the motion unamended.
Unamended, my apologies, Dr. Max. What I would like to say is one of the benefits of working virtually is that I have the opportunity to fact check the Labour group as they speak. And given that the first bid was created in the same year that Sadiq Khan was born, and the first one in the United Kingdom started in 2005, I find it strange that we are crediting him with inventing the wheel. What I would say, though, is that the essence of the amendment is fair. There are many things there that we are already doing. I think the one most close to my heart is certainly around parking. We've currently got in the borough just under 20% of our parking spaces allocated for key workers, NHS staff, teachers, police officers, all sorts, shopkeepers. There is a huge number of people that are using that at the moment. We were over 5,000 people coming into the borough and parking and benefiting from our disregard list. And I think that was a fundamentally wonderful thing for us to do. I would also add that what we've been doing in the background is we've been able to innovate. During this coronavirus pandemic, we've been able now to move entirely to a virtual parking system. This has sped up the work for our wardens. This has made it easier for people to get their permits online. It has meant we are not printing and laminating thousands upon thousands of pieces of paper and posting them around the borough. We are doing things digitally. We have moved and we have innovated. And following on from Councillor Wason's point, that's exactly what businesses have to do, but it is also exactly what councils have to do. We have to innovate. We have to continue to push forward. And the measures that Councillor Thalasitis have already mentioned, and I'm sure Councillor Folkes will bring up later, are wonderful things. We are doing nearly everything that Councillor Press is asking us to do. But what I find disturbing about the amendment is that it's trying to bind our hands. It's not giving us the freedom of Councillor Bennett's original unamended motion to speak and to move forward in all sectors, not just the ones that they prescribe in their amendment. That's why I would rather have our hands free to work in all sectors and innovate across the council, not just in the items that they describe. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Press, I'd now ask you, do you want to sum up for the amendment, please?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Very briefly. I think this has been an extremely positive and interesting, useful debate. And I think we all share many of the visions that have been expressed by the proposers and the speakers. But a motion is something which defines for businesses and residents where our real commitment is. And currently, the priority now is the actual immediate recovery and response to the opening up that the government's announced. So many of our specific plans give residents and businesses a clear idea of how these things will be smoothly and safely implemented. And they don't define, obviously, the consultation required. They're basically saying what needs to be in place so that residents and businesses can judge us, and they have something by the end of July, which I'm sure the leadership and all officers would welcome as clear guidelines. So that's why I urge you to vote for the amendment, and I definitely hope that you would, at a minimum, accept that a key stakeholder will be the GLA and the Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Foulkes, would you like to respond as a lead member for business, please?
Thank you very much. I would. Firstly, thank you very much to Councillor Bennett and Councillor Wason for bringing this motion. I think it's really, really important. Councillor Bennett very vividly brought to life how brilliant Kensington Chelsea is, how lively it is, what amazing shops and businesses that we have here. And it is this lifeblood of our businesses that all just suddenly came to a stop with the Coronavirus Act. Museums stopped, retail, hospitality, everything in one day. That was it. National and international tourism was banned. 2,600 shops, 430 restaurants and 155 hotels in the borough were suddenly shut and empty. It's an absolutely enormous challenge that we've got ahead of us. Kensington and Chelsea generate 10.4 billion of money for the government. So what we do here is not only important about what happens in Kensington and Chelsea, it's really important for the rest of the country. We've got 15,000 registered businesses here, 9,000 of them which pay business rates. And every day we have a staggering 121,000 people who are working in this borough. And the majority of them are actually coming from outside the borough to work here, to shop here and to eat here. But we've got to face up to some really tough facts that some of these businesses aren't going to survive. And for a lot of the reasons that Councillor Wason was telling us about, it's just been, they've had everything thrown at them. And some of the challenges will be insurmountable. And the result of that is that many lives will be facing uncertainty and difficulty, and many dreams will be dashed. But after the safety of our health and residents, which always must come first, it is the council's priority to get our businesses moving again and to explore and implement all the resources that we have in power. So I just want to reassure Councillor Prest when she was implying that we just made some superficial gestures and we haven't actually done very much, that actually we have been hard at it 7 days a week, communicating, innovating, as Jem and Johnny have said, of bringing things forward that would normally have taken months for this council to get round to doing. And I'm really, really proud of both the leadership team of working so closely and collaboratively together to do this, and also for our offices to just make it possible for us to do it. So I just quickly, I've got so much to say that I'm worried I'm going to run out of time. But in case I do run out of time, I urge everyone, in particular Councillor Prest, to look at the business section on the council website, which is really, really informative. And it's updated every single day with all the grants, all the guidance for businesses, all the licensing, parking. I mean, it's a fantastic resource, the RBKC website. So I'm surprised none of you have been looking at it to see what we've actually been doing. So just very quickly, as people have alluded to, the government did put some financial support in place very quickly. And for this borough, that amounted to 233 million, covering over 3,000 businesses, and that was giving them business rate relief for a year, and one-off business rates to 2,100 businesses, totaling over 40 million a year. And 9,400 jobs have been protected by the furlough scheme, and 2,900 self-employed people have received 8.4 million pounds of support. So I think that was great. But actually, we all recognised right from the beginning that there were going to be gaps in the support that the government put forward, because they had to do it incredibly quickly. And this is where I really want to thank the Economic Development team, who came up with the council Business Interruption Fund. And really quickly, we've managed to provide 500,000, which was distributed to 147 small businesses. So I'm going to whiz ahead quickly to rush through some of the other things that we're doing, which I think are really important.
So we're developing with stakeholders a marketing scheme and an advertising scheme. We've had a lot of forums with the Earls Court Business Rate Forum, Kensington High Street Forum, with museums, with freeholders, with RAs, with amenities. We're listening to our stakeholders because it's only when they come together with us will we make it work. We have just launched, and this is important for all of you wanting to know what other funding is available, a new discretionary grant scheme. The details are on the website. It launched on Monday. This is 2.2 million's worth of new funding, and specifically we've used it to extend the retail hospitality and leisure grant for those businesses who have a rateable value up to 65,000, and that's going to help another 54 businesses in our borough. We are also building as I say, this very good portal on the website. We've written letters to 11,000 businesses in the borough with advice and guidance. Our officers, as I said, are literally hourly putting up new guidance for our businesses to how to be prepared to reopen, and they're advising them on supply chains as how they can group buy the material they need. But really importantly, because this is something that's mentioned in the motion and I think really is going to make a huge difference, is that we are developing a one-stop shop, a business unit which will have one number and one email address that all businesses will be able to phone into or email into to cover all these areas, whether it's licensing, planning, grants, safety. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bennett, would you wish to sum up your motion before we go to a vote on the amendment and then the final motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I just want to say that I absolutely will not let Councillor Press's comparison to Don Draper, between Ian and myself and Don Draper, to go to my head. But I just want to agree with many of the sentiments that have been expressed, and Councillor Press's comments in particular about the quality of the debate we've had tonight. And I'm sure ideas such as the business, the bids, the business improvement districts, Councillor Wade's concerns on communications for small businesses will be very much taken on board by everyone, including leadership. And I also want to thank the three lead members who spoke for their updates on a wide variety of things, including the one-stop shop, which sounds like it'll be very important for businesses. And just to say that it's unfortunate that the minority group couldn't come to us earlier with the amendment, because as we've said, I think there was a lot of good stuff in there, and we may have been able to incorporate it in. But I think the amendment as stands is still an incredibly positive motion that really does set a broad direction of travel for the council in supporting our businesses. It makes it clear that we must act quickly. We must not rule anything out, and we have to do whatever is necessary. And I'm sure the minority group, as always, will judge us on our actions rather than our words. And again, encouraged to see that many of those actions are already taking place. So I, as I say, wholeheartedly commend the motion to members.
Thank you very much. And now put the amendment to the vote. There's the amendment we're voting on now. Councillor Kamali, are the Conservative group for or against the amendment, please?
Mr. Mayor, we'll be voting against the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Lowry, are the Labour group for or against the amendment?
The Labour group is for the amendment.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wade, are you for or against the amendment, or are you abstaining?
Abstaining.
Councillor Palmer wasn't. Councillor Palmer, you haven't joined us, have you? Okay. Are there any other abstentions of votes not along party lines? So I declare the amendment lost. Councillor Press, you may have up to 5 minutes to respond, or you may wish to go to the final vote.
I'm very happy to go to the final vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So I now put the unamended motion to the vote. Councillor Kamali, are the Conservative group for or against the motion?
We are for the motion as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Lowry, are the Labour Group for or against the motion?
We are with reservations for the motion as it stands.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, are you for or against the motion or abstaining?
I'm for the motion, and I hope some of the comments will be absorbed.
Thank you very much. So I declare the motion carried. So I now call on motion on COVID-19 costs. Members will see that as an amendment has been submitted. So I ask Councillor Lowry formally to move the motion. Okay, does someone wish to declare an interest? Max, do you wish to, Councillor Chown, do you wish to declare an interest? You've got your hand up. Okay, Councillor Lowry, call upon you to formally move the motion and Councillor Mason to formally second.
I beg to move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Mason?
Happy to second the motion.
Okay, Councillor Lowry, you have up to 5 minutes to speak to the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thousands of our residents have been made unemployed or furloughed since the beginning of the crisis. The latest data from the Office of National Statistics shows the borough's out-of-work claimant count stands at 5.4% compared to 2% 1 year ago, and claims for universal credit have increased by 64% at the North Kensington Job Centre alone. We should thank our council officers for putting in the extra effort during the crisis while adjusting to work from home arrangements. Meanwhile, it is simply too early for the council leadership to be patting itself on the back while health and economic inequalities have exacerbated at all levels, and many residents now have to choose between paying their rents or feeding their children. Decades of austerity and funding inequality from central government have severely hindered the ability of local councils to respond to national crises such as coronavirus. However, at the start of the crisis, our neighbouring boroughs prepared themselves to support those hard hit by food poverty. Hammersmith and Fulham Council was pre-prepared to deal with the increase in food demand, already funding their Trussell Trust food bank to the tune of £50,000 annually before the crisis began. As soon as the crisis hit, Hammersmith and Fulham leapt into action, negotiating the conversion of Olympia London's National Hall into a large food storage, production and distribution facility for their food bank to support the many hundreds of vulnerable and income-strapped residents reliant on donations. This is an excellent example of a cooperative relationship between a council and the voluntary sector. On the other hand, as the crisis unfolded, many voluntary sector organisations in Kensington and Chelsea felt unsupported by this council. Local charities and community organisations organised their own efforts to respond to the crisis and feed their people, whilst being hit by unyielding bureaucracy and regulation from this council to complicate their activities. Until just recently, this council did not consider hot food to be a current need on the ground, and councillors have been prevented from donating funds to food banks from their ward budget. No praise can be too high for the work of local organisations such as the Social Council and Kensington Chelsea Food Bank, as well as faith groups such as the Gurdwara, who have been cooking and delivering many hundreds of hot meals for local residents every day of this crisis. Our council's finances are now in a grave position through the combination of 33.4 million in lost income, predominantly from lost parking charges and commercial rent, and an additional 11.1 million expenditure, mostly covering adult social care. A study released just yesterday by the Centre for Progressive Policy reveals that 8 out of 10 local authorities do not have sufficient funds to make up for lost income and will need to choose between making devastating cuts to social care and core services or face bankruptcy. As a whole, the LGA projects that councils in England are facing a funding gap of 10 to 13 billion due to the cost pressures of fighting COVID-19. So far, the government has allocated just 3.2 billion to councils to help them through the crisis. This is nowhere near the amount needed to cover this gap. The situation in Kensington and Chelsea is actually much worse. Our borough was handed a 29% cut in the emergency funding it received from the central government while we tried to tackle the virus. The 6th worst cut of any local authority in the country, and by far the worst of any Conservative-led authority. This is because the emergency package was issued to us in 2 distinct calculations. The first tranche of funding from government, worth 5.95 million to the council, was determined using the Adult Social Care Relative Needs formula. However, the second tranche was determined on a per capita basis, meaning that councils in the more deprived metropolitan areas have been left worse off, us included. Kensington and Chelsea was therefore left with just 4.2 million funding in our second tranche. Quite literally, the Conservative government has gerrymandered funding away from areas of high levels of infection towards areas with lower levels of infection, devastating our communities already hardest hit by a decade of austerity and still suffering as a result of Grenfell. We therefore disagree with the Tory amendment to our motion, which states that we must be grateful for what we've received. We should not be grateful. Local government funding is not a charitable exercise, but rather an urgent obligation to enable us to balance our books legally whilst avoiding devastating cuts to core services and job losses in the very near future. To sum up, a further injection of at least 6 billion is needed from central government for local authorities across the country to make up the funding gap. This council must urgently call on the government to ensure deprivation and need are the default criteria for the distribution of any further funding, as this is the only equitable method for our borough to receive what is needed to cater for our most vulnerable communities. We implore councillors to support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. And as Councillor Larry has said, this motion is about asking the leadership team to keep the foot down on the accelerator with the government. And Councillor Wheel and Aretti's amendment is simply an exercise in splitting hairs and playing semantics, is it not? Because they're asking, their amendment is asking the same thing as the Labour motion is. Any motion is really comes down to what you're asking the council, or in this case, a council, to do. And the Labour group are asking the council, urging the council leadership to demand that the government honours their commitment to do whatever it takes to support local authorities and to compensate RBKC for the full COVID-19 costs and loss of income costs that should not be borne by borough residents in high. And it goes on to talk about how it will have an effect on borough residents. The amendment, the amendment prayer says the council is grateful for the 10.1 million already received in grant from the government and for other positive measures they have taken in addressing the pandemic, such as the furlough scheme, but asks the council leadership to press the government to honour its commitment to do whatever it takes to support local authorities and to compensate RBKC for the remaining loss of income borne by the council, including loss of income, to ensure that the pandemic does not have a longer-term impact. So, the prayers, apart from taking bits out, are exactly the same. And the last time we saw this sort of thing happening was in the last council under Nick Paget-Brown, when he would take out, he would rewrite, or not him, but his group would rewrite motions almost entirely on changing a sentence here or a sentence there. So it's exactly the same prayer. We are asking the council leadership to compensate the council for the entire loss to the council, which in this case is 34.5 million, because 10.1 million is $1 million less than what we have actually got. Now, as Councillor Larry has said, the idea that we should be grateful grateful that the government gave us 10.1 million, which, as I said, is 1 million less than our direct COVID costs as at the 5th of May, so it may even be higher then, it's quite preposterous. If the government hears that we are grateful for the few crumbs thrown from their table, they may think they've done enough. Now, last year, each year the council budget is covering something like upwards of 20 million budget hole, which we managed to do. And if we cannot, if we keep on spending and we cannot get the money back, then it's going to affect spending in housing, family and children's services, adult social care, all of the things that Councillor Fox and others talked about, all of these wonderful things that they were talking about either doing or planning. These will all be affected by ongoing costs. Now, the Prime Minister's word is either worth something or it's worth nothing when he promised to put money on the table. And that will permeate through the country. Telling councils at the front line of the pandemic that they will get whatever it takes and then failing to honour this commitment in full is tantamount to dumping the costs, of course, onto all of our boroughs' residents who are already laden with debt, because if councils don't get the money, services will have to be cut. There's nothing else that can happen. So giving the council 10.1 million is not doing whatever it takes. Kensington and Chelsea's remaining 34.5 million extra costs, because we didn't get the full direct cost, 11.1 million we have already spent, equals almost 4 years of the Grenfell Recovery Strategy spend. Now, London councils only this morning repeated what Councillor Larry said. They repeated that in London, the boroughs face a 1.8 million extra spend.
1 minute, please, Councillor.
Yes, a loss of income. And it's going to be 10 billion nationally. So all that we're really asking the leadership team to do, both motions, or the motion and the amendment, is that the leadership team should seek to recover the full COVID direct costs, which we haven't recovered fully, and the loss of income costs, which all added up to the 45.3 million. That's what we're asking the leadership team to do for all of the reasons that we have all spoken about this evening. We have a budget coming up. We have a hole in the budget. We're going to soon get a medium-term financial strategy at the July leadership team meeting. That is going to have to, we are told, produce options to compensate for any money we do not get or cannot get from the government. So it's quite. I cannot see that this is anything other than semantics. The amendment is nothing other than semantics. It's the prayer of the motion that is the important thing, because that's what activates a motion.
Thank you very much. I now call on the amendment. Councillor Wheel to formally move the amendment.
Formally move, Mr. Mayor.
And Councillor Retty to second. Councillor Reddy.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Wheel, do you wish to speak for up to 5 minutes to the amendment?
Thank you. Well, I do have some sympathy with the concern that we are putting an amendment forward, but of course Councillor Press has always put it so much better than me when she put her amendment forward. There are parts of this motion that I simply can't accept, and they seem like part of a propaganda campaign. Although I would hazard that Councillor Lowry is perhaps less Don Draper than Rick in The Young Ones. Hyperbolic here and inaccurate in places. If you could wield Occam's razor in future, we might not have to amend motions in quite this way. I say inaccurate because apart from anything else, we shouldn't be lumped together with other boroughs. This council is challenged, seriously challenged by COVID, but we're not precarious. And we do all need to work together to address the issues, including our ask of government, both in committees and in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And I did feel that we ought to acknowledge more graciously the breadth of the government's swift and decisive action, including furlough and the business rates relief. However, as I say, I am in sympathy with the main thrust of the motion. I think we all understand that there has been a disproportionate effect on those in poverty, both in terms of income and something I feel very strongly about, schooling. The work that Councillor Siren has done on the ground to support our voluntary sector has been both thorough and imaginative. So we do need resources to continue our work to offset the effects of COVID on the poorest of our community, and we will be asking government for that. However, to that end, we ourselves have already added from council funds £500,000 to the Business Interruption Fund and £500,000 to our hardship fund. So we have been ahead of the curve on looking at the needs and demands both of our business community and of our residents. We also need to help to try and mitigate the effect of lockdown on businesses. We have committed significant resources on our own to supplement the government, as I've mentioned. Councillor Lowry points out about the proportion of our funding, and that is understandable. His concern is understandable, but we also need to acknowledge that as a country, we are all in this together, and the plight of other local authorities who got scant allocation in the first round, they did have a very clear case for some evening up. I think COVID has raised some interesting points about how councils raise their funding and who bears the burden. And I do believe that council tax is too clumsy to deal with this particular crisis, and government is in the best position to raise funds and to help us out of this. But whilst we're asking for these things, we have to remember that we will all end up paying for it, but perhaps in a more equitable and manageable fashion if government steps in to the extent that we in this chamber all hope. It's also interesting to note that our determination of a borough to make the most of our assets and gain rental income from our premises has left us in this instance vulnerable, although not as vulnerable, of course, as local authorities who borrowed to invest, something this council hasn't done. The other interesting insight I think we've had, all of us, is our relationship with businesses in the borough. Most businesses know that we don't set or value the rate or value their premises, just collect it. But this crisis has brought home to us the importance of the role that Councillor Folkes has assumed and already adopted with such vigour, liaising, encouraging and prioritising the interests of our businesses. So what do we have to do? We have to keep our own house in order to start with. We have to bear down on our losses whilst remaining absolutely committed to helping those in need and drive forward those savings that we were working towards next year. But we do also resolve, as the motion as amended suggests, to ask government to fulfil their commitment. Councillor Campbell has already been very active lobbying London councils and engaging with the MHCLG and our MPs. Officers have also been on the same purpose, working through the Society of London Treasurers and London councils, and they will continue to do so as the situation develops and changes. So I commend my amendment to the chamber. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wheel. Councillor Retty, do you wish to speak for up to 5 minutes?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everyone. I also thank some of the officers, councillors and lead members who have done exceptionally well during the pandemic, especially...
Is it in the kitchen?
Hello?
Carry on, Councillor Retty. Can other members please mute the microphones? Councillor Retty, carry on, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Finally, thank you, Councillor Wheel, for summarising the overall efforts made by the council and the government commitment. The reason I support the amendment, Mr. Mayor, is that the government had done exceptionally well, and some of the schemes that you look at in the relief package, such as furlough schemes, business grant, bounce back loans, were exceptionally well, and I've seen it change people's lives. And I know there needs to be more done to rebuild lives, and I'm sure the government will carry on supporting our council and all the councils with the recovery process. And although the recovery process would be more difficult to achieve and also harder to manage the expectations, but I'm sure the government will work together with the councils. And although I support the amendment, Mr. Mayor, I take some of the concerns by the Labour's motion on, especially on the BAME community who had been disproportionately impacted. And I would like to join the leadership team and request the government to work with the council, release more funds, especially for the BAME communities, so that they can regain their livelihoods before everything is over. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you for giving this chance, and I'm sure that everyone would support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite councillors to speak for up to 5 minutes. Councillor Lindsay, do you wish to speak?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that. Mr. Mayor, this motion and the amendment both rightly acknowledge that the cost of COVID to this borough and indeed into the country has been huge. If it is 44.5 million to date, that equates with roughly 8% of the total budget for the year, but after 3 months. And for the country as a whole, the figures are astronomical. And if we ask the government to bail us out in full, to, as has been requested, and I'm not against that, we have to acknowledge where it's going to come from. It's going to come from the government borrowing more. And that is because we are spending more than we are getting in income. I know I'm speaking very clearly as to what the simple dynamics are, but the reality is that there comes a time when we will not be able to borrow as in the amounts that we have been, because they are so large. And Councillor Wheel said that she thought that the council tax was a somewhat blunt instrument for all of local government funding. She can probably, when she summarises, correct me as to exactly what she said, but the gist of it was that council tax is not an ideal means for all that we should be raising. And I would want to suggest that now is the time when we look carefully at what local government should be doing, what do we need, what can we afford? And that we actually need to look at staffing, at pensions, at all the terms of all the terms and conditions of staffing. And we as councillors should be glad, because politics is, after all, a balance of different priorities. And we will all be needed because different councils in different places have different needs and different priorities. And that, Mr. Mayor, is what I wish to say. I am not personally against having, I suppose, we could have a local income tax, possibly with the same rate paid by everyone, with central government having personal allowances and higher rates of tax. But that is not for here and for now. But I do think we need to look at how local government should look after this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thaxter, do you wish to speak?
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Thaxter is not speaking. I actually sent an updated list to
okay.
Mr. Carl.
Okay. Councillor Taylor-Smith, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I promise I'll be brief about this. I really just wanted to talk about one specific aspect of this, and that's the housing revenue account, because this has had coronavirus, COVID-19 has had a really significant impact on the HRA, and we have to remember that obviously, that is the HRA revenue is money that comes out of our residents' pockets. But really, what I want to talk about is a little bit about what we're doing to try and address that. Now, first of all, our housing management team have called thousands of our residents on welfare calls, and it's quite interesting in terms of the feedback, and it goes back to the point that Councillor Lowry was making about what the needs are and what we've discovered, and this is from talking to people initially from the shielded group and now everybody over the age of the 60s, is that the majority of wants that people want is all to do with isolation and wanting return call. But we do have people that do have a need and do need support. We've been working with our residents in putting together a hardship fund, to obviously help support people who have lost income, and also as a bridge for those while they're applying for government support. But equally, we are encouraging our residents to pay their rent. But in doing so, we obviously have to support them and able to do so. And our collection rate during the COVID pandemic is running at about 92%, which is obviously a lot lower than what it was before. So our arrears are escalating. But I can confirm that we are working with residents, with them on this in order to support them. Equally, I just want to touch on the commercial tenants that we have. And again, Councillor Mason referred to people on Goulburn Road. And we've looked at how we might support our commercial tenancies, but we've concluded that one size does not fit all. because obviously some of our commercial tenants, we're dealing with them on a case-by-case basis, because some of our commercial tenants are trading during lockdown, some of them are trading very well during lockdown, some of our tenants are extremely large and wealthy organisations who do have the ability to pay. So our overriding policy is to ensure that these businesses do survive and that we don't end up with empty shops on our high street. And that's something which, again, I commend the officers and all the work that they're doing in order to do that. But I think I've made it very clear that we're doing everything within our power to support our businesses and tenants. But this is a job that's going to get harder as the government furlough scheme comes to an end. And universal credit, again, as Councillor Lowry has referred to, I mean, that's more than doubled within the last 2 months, which very much is adding pressure on to both our residents and our businesses. So really, Mayor, I'd like to just conclude by saying I support the amendment. One point just quickly on the amendment, which talks about higher service charges. Well, again, I can specifically say that service charges won't go up as a result of coronavirus. I mean, services are for services as described. And so there won't be any change to service charges. But really what I wanted to conclude, Mayor, is to say that we're doing everything in our power to support our residents and businesses. And the scale of this support is dramatically increasing. So it is clear that we do need to press, emphasis on the word press. Councillor Mason talks about pressing his foot onto the pedal, on the pedal. And obviously what we're doing is changing the word demand to press. But we do need to press for further support from the government. So I support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lowry, I did have Councillor Alley on the list to speak. I don't have any other Labour Party members to speak. Would you like to speak?
I think I needed to sum up on the amendment.
Okay. So let me just take another couple of other contributions. Councillor Siren, and then I'll come back to this summing up. Councillor Siren.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on everyone in our borough, and it's particularly stressful and frightening for our families and residents who are already suffering from hardship. During the first few months, our focus was rightly on the vulnerable, the shielded and those in hardship. And we worked really closely and very much hand in hand with our community and voluntary groups and the NHS in partnership to organise our response, which includes an under 65 offer with the Social Council and an over 65 offer with AGK. Through our COVID central hub, it means you can signpost all residents to support they need, and this includes support with food, where we have coordinated food deliveries from City Harvest and the GLA via the Curve and Almanart to our increased food bank network. To respond to Councillor Lowry's comments on food, I'm sure Councillor Lowry has been visiting our food banks, just as I have, and he will therefore know that all of them have sufficient food, and other than requests for very specific items, for example, in some cases, size 6 nappies, they are not in need of food. If that changes, we'll find a solution, but I think it's unfair to say that councillors have been prevented from providing food, because when there was a need, the council provided it. And it's not required now. And if it's needed again, then we'll address this if and when it is required. And we continue to monitor the food supply daily, so we know exactly what's happening with the food supply. In fact, I think the biggest problem most food banks have is where to store the amount of food that they have. I don't think it's patting ourselves on the back to say it's been a good response. I do think we've learned from our response to the Grenfell tragedy, and this partnership is definitely a better way to do things. And of course, it's not perfect, and of course, the need is huge, but we will continue to try and learn and evolve. And we really have supported our voluntary organisations. We've provided extra funding, regular calls with offers of support if needed, and where appropriate, food. We also have an enhanced hardship offer, and our hub includes many members of staff who've been redeployed and retrained very quickly to support our residents with this assistance. We also signpost those that are vulnerable and shielding to the shopping offer, which again is in partnership with the VCS and the private sector. So in addition, we've also supported our 6,000 shielded residents who have been on the shielded list. And this is mainly around food and physical and mental well-being, as well as calling all our council tenants who are vulnerable to see if they're all right and if they need any support. We've listened to and worked with our faith leaders through the Faith Forum and kept open dialogue with our amazing volunteer groups who've really highlighted, again, what a brilliant community spirit we have here, with so many people wanting to be there for their neighbours. We're now having more conversations more widely with our residents and RAs as we continue to develop a recovery plan. The cost of all of this has been huge, but we've rightly responded by putting the needs of our residents first. The motion and the amended motion rightly highlights that our BAME communities are disproportionately affected, and we need to ensure that we do support these communities and the organisations that support them. We also need to remember that our older residents and their families have also been disproportionately affected, and we must support them too as we emerge from lockdown. I feel we have a long road ahead of us, much of which will not be easy, but I think it's been truly inspiring to see how everyone has come together, and I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who has come together to support others.
Thank you. Councillor Wheel, do you wish to respond to the amendment you're proposing?
Sorry, I was locked out there for a moment. I'm back again. I just really wanted to round up by saying that there are things that we ourselves can do, such as get our own house in order, whilst continuing to emphasise protecting the most vulnerable. We can back our businesses and hope it starts perhaps a conversation about local government. But fundamentally, the thrust of both this amendment and the motion is that we do need government to step up to the plate too and fulfil their promise to take what it to give what it takes in this recovery, and that we will be doing our part, both via officers and their networks and the leadership team, and particularly our leader and her contacts at government level, to amplify and repeat that ask. So that's all I've got to say on the amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lowry, do you wish to respond to the amendment?
Hi there, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do. Firstly, thank you everyone for the, I think, quite positive debate. It's quite clear that both groups are looking towards the same outcome in this motion, in that we both acknowledge that we will not be able to balance our budget without catastrophic cuts to services, selling libraries, closing leisure centres, as well as council staff cuts without extra funding from the government. But I think it's also clear that some members of the leadership team may be in denial as to how we got here in the first place. There are three parts to the amendment. The first part of the amendment, which is the first paragraph, is merely a matter of semantics, and that to me is acceptable. The second part of the amendment involves deleting the line that refers to 10 years of austerity funding reductions that has left many councils in a precarious financial position. Unfortunately, this part of the amendment shows that Councillor Wheel and some fellow leadership team members are perhaps in denial. If this council had not borne the brunt of funding inequality, financial inflexibility and funding cuts over the past decade, then in fact we wouldn't have a financial black hole today of almost 30 million. So if you don't think our council hasn't suffered underfunding, then maybe you shouldn't have proposed an amendment but actually voted against this motion. It's just illogical. The third part of the amendment is the bit where it kowtows to Boris Johnson by saying how grateful we are. Again, I don't think we should be saying we're grateful for having a financial black hole because we've been severely underfunded. My personal view and the view of my Labour colleagues is that government funding for local government should be an obligation. It's not charity. Our residents want justice, not charity. Of course, the reason why the government can get away with funding gerrymandering is because local government exists purely on licence from national government, and ultimately, if local authorities want fairer funding, we require a system which local government itself can control, alongside a redistribution mechanism to ensure fairness. But we have what we've got today. I urge you to vote against the amendment because it's simply illogical.
Thank you. So I shall now put the amendment to the vote. Councillor Kamali, are the Conservative Group for or against the amendment?
We are for the logical amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Lowry, are the Labour Group for or against the amendment?
We are against the amendment.
Councillor Wade, are you for or against the amendment or abstaining?
I'm against the amendment.
Thank you. Are there any other abstentions or votes not along party lines? I therefore declare the amendment carried. So, Councillor Lowry, do you wish to sum up before we go to the main vote?
I only wish to say, Mr. Mayor, that the Labour Group will vote in favour of this amended motion because we do think it's important. Government funding is the only way to address our budget black hole. But the Labour Group will not be grovelling to Boris Johnson or thanking him for underfunding our council and cutting our emergency funding by 29%. We instead wish to restore the adult social care relative needs formula, which has always historically been used for funding local government, and do away with this ridiculous per capita formula that's merely underfunded inner cities with a lower population, local authorities with a lower population, which coincidentally are areas of higher COVID infection. But we will be voting in favour of the motion.
Thank you. So I shall now put the motion as amended to the vote. Councillor Kamali, are the Conservative Group for or against the motion as amended?
We are for the amended motion.
Thank you. And Councillor Lowry?
We are for the amended motion.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, are you for or against the motion or abstaining?
For the amended motion.
Thank you very much. Are there any other abstentions or votes not along party lines? I therefore declare the motion as amended carried. So we now call the motion on schools. Members will see that an amendment has been submitted. I ask Councillor Dury Informer to move the motion standing in his name and Councillor Evans formally to second.
Yes, I'd like to move the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Evans?
I second it, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dorian, to speak up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been speaking most of this evening about business and the importance of supporting our local economy as much as we can, but equally, if not more important, is making sure the education and therefore the future of our children and young people is not damaged permanently as a result of this crisis. And speaking as a school governor myself, I've seen firsthand the tremendous efforts put in by all those working in schools to make sure that lessons can continue to be delivered as much as possible throughout the lockdown period, and the support from the council has been invaluable. Clearly, there are and have been challenges. Some schools have been able to quickly leverage technology that they were already familiar with to deliver virtual lessons, for instance, while others clearly have more work to do to get there. Some have to deliver activities for children who still do not have access to fast broadband or a good laptop at home. Inevitably, some pupils will not have engaged with learning to the extent needed and will have to catch up more than others. And this will be the key challenge in education over the rest of this year. As a council, we trust our head teachers and their colleagues to run their very individual and unique schools, all with their own demographics, with their own particular set of challenges. But we do, of course, have a role in working with them to deliver guidance and practical assistance wherever necessary. And I believe we have already demonstrated as a council that we are able to do that. And I call on the lead members to continue placing high priority on making sure we help our schools deliver that catch-up, particularly to those children who are going to need it the most. So in conclusion, while this has, of course, been a difficult time and continues to be a difficult time for many of our residents, I am sure that in the long run, our schools certainly will emerge more resilient and build on their already excellent work, as we know, in Kensington and Chelsea, to deliver even better outcomes for our children right across the borough. And I hope that we can all support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Evans, do you wish to speak for up to 5 minutes, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would first of all like to welcome our new lead member for Family and Children's Services, Josh Rendell. We look forward to working with him and scrutinizing his officers. A huge thank you to the head teachers, the teachers, the counselors, the officers, and all support staff who have really risen to this huge challenge during this COVID-19 lockdown. It has been amazing. I would like to welcome back the students as they're coming back in phases. They've had tremendous challenges. They have dealt with seriously ill people in numerous numbers. And for young children, that is really a trauma. In addition, every day on television, they saw massive deaths. And it is something that I do not think they will forget for the rest of their lives. I certainly won't. The children have been locked down for 3 months. This has caused mental health problems. It has caused depression. The children have had to study online, and as much as they like computers, that certainly is very challenging for both children and parents. And then, of course, they saw on the television and the news the death of George Floyd. This is something that, unfortunately, is a reality. They have seen many deaths that have been brought up, especially in the United States and including a few in this country, and we have to deal with it. George Floyd called for his mother. When he called for his mother, he called all parents. He called all counselors. He called all officers. We must step up for education. The Royal Borough has excellent schools. I call on our lead member for Family and Children's Services to give maximum support to deliver equal education that will help everyone level up, equal opportunities for all students, an education which gives our students pride, respect, and skills so they can have a fulfilling life. All of us together in this borough, counselors, and you must go to your communities, and we must do this together. I strongly support this motion, and I ask you all to support it with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call the amendment. Councillor Atkinson to form the move and Councillor Niall to form the second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to move our amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to second the motion.
Councillor Atkinson, you have up to 5 minutes to speak to your amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Of course, we on the Labour side also are grateful to everybody in the school communities for what they have done for our children and what they'll be going to be doing in the future. However, I'm not very happy with the wording of the original wording of the resolution, in that it appears to me but to be somewhat evasive in terms of the commitments it makes, and disguising that with being sycophantic. The purpose, therefore, of our amendment is to give it some teeth and to actually agree that what we, the council, are going to do, other than stand on the sidelines and applaud other people. Firstly, the first point I want to make is to demand that local government is given its due role and to require national government to stop the downgrading and neglect of local government and councils. And certainly I think the slow and generalised response of central government to the COVID crisis has shown just how important it is that we have decent local government in this country, and we finance it and we give it some teeth. Specifically, we wish to amend the resolution to make the following commitments. Firstly, that those schools and organisations who wish to provide on-site and significant online teaching provision over the summer period to those families which want and need it should be encouraged to do so. As Councillor Press said in a different context earlier, we've known that this was coming since last March, and it seems to me that it appears to me that what the government is doing over education is to postpone everything till September. So I think those that want and need education over the summer months should be encouraged to do so. Secondly, we think it's appropriate to give appropriate and extended childcare for the children of the borough over the summer months, so that those parents who are increasingly at their wits' end, both in terms of their survival in their homes and in financially, are able to go back to work and to provide for themselves. Thirdly, the borough over the summer months needs to be taking practical steps to ensure that and working with our schools to make sure that additional classrooms, staff and space are provided, so that by September all our children can go back full-time for face-to-face education. Because whilst I would agree that online education has a certain role to play, it's not the same and certainly not as good as school-based full-time education, and therefore this council doesn't just need to applaud what our communities are doing, we need to be giving commitments, money and support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Nell, do you wish to speak for up to 5 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to commend the council officers in the Family and Children Services for their hard work and commitment in supporting vulnerable families and their children during these challenging times. Also, I would like to thank teachers, head teachers, teaching assistants and all school staff for their effort to keep schools open, especially for vulnerable children and key workers' children. Mr. Mayor, this council must ensure its commitment to supporting families and their children with their online learning by providing necessary equipment, whether it's internet access or provision for digital devices that enable children from low-income families to get the right access to virtual education, so no one will be left behind. This council must ensure that comprehensive risk assessment, adequate PPE supply, and regular testing are available to ensure a safe reopening to schools during summer and at the start of the school year in September. Mr. Mayor, I ask the council leadership to enhance its effort this summer by providing young people with adequate learning activities during summertime, ranging from summer schools to outdoor activities and summer camp for children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Mr. Mayor, in our return to Family and Children Services scrutiny, a report from School Exclusion Working Group highlighted the disproportionate amount of Black boys from Afro-Caribbean heritage in the pool of those excluded. This only occurred as a result of prejudice and discrimination within the school system. This issue must be addressed. Schools need support as they don't have time or resources or expertise to deal with children who need support with social and economic difficulties rather than just handing them punishment. Mr. Mayor, this council leadership should provide welfare officers to support students, and relevant training must be provided to teachers. Therefore, this council has to fulfill its duty by supporting our fantastic schools so every child can achieve their potential irrespective of their economic or social circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time and I want to get this debate finished. Any members wish to speak? Councillor Hammond, you'd indicated you wish to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And may I start by saying I don't think very much of the Labour amendment. Of course, both speakers spoke well and there were one or two good points in there, but the fundamental model that they put forward is one that harks back to a period of central control, central diktat within each local authority. One size fits all. Well, one size does not fit all. And I think the current model is a better one. I was also rather surprised that they criticised governments of the last 20 years in their amendment, because I might remind the party opposite that they were in power for the first 10 years of that. And far be it from me to give them any lessons in electoral strategy. Their leader of the time, Tony Blair, won 3 elections, and since they dumped him, they've lost all 4 elections since. But I'm glad that Councillor Nail mentioned the exclusions working group. It was a great privilege to lead that working group on the over the last council year as a member of the Family Services Select Committee. And the exclusions really, we found the personal experience of exclusion really is a very profound one, both for the pupils affected and for their families. And it's a very important issue to address. And what we've had with lockdown, effectively, it's that kind of negative effect on a whole generation of kids for the last 3 months or so. So it is really, really important that we get the schools back in full in September. But I do want to commend the schools that have been working throughout for the efforts they put in for the children of key workers, and those that have started back over the last couple of weeks with extra classes. And I particularly want to recognise the schools in Courtfield Ward, Our Lady of Victory's primary school, and several independent schools for the excellent work that they're all doing. One point I will just finish with, Councillor Nail mentioned that the prejudice and discrimination in schools was the only reason that Afro-Caribbean boys were overrepresented amongst those that are excluded. I don't think we know that. We didn't make that point in the exclusions report. We said that Afro-Caribbean boys are most prevalent for at risk of exclusion. And that's a national trend, and it's mirrored in RBKC. What we didn't say was the reason why, because we haven't identified the reason why, but we did make a recommendation in the report for unconscious bias training for teachers, which I think they will welcome, but that's a means of addressing a potential issue, but we don't know if it's the only issue behind that problem. But overall, I think this is an excellent motion without the amendment, and I do commend it to the Chamber.
Thank you. Councillor Atkinson, do you wish to sum up your amendment, please? And then I'll call Councillor Randall to respond as lead member. Councillor Atkinson, do you wish to sum up, please? Councillor Atkinson, do you wish to sum up? In which case then I shall, Councillor Nowell, do you wish to sum up, please? Councillor Nowell, do you wish to sum up the amendment?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mr. Mayor?
Hear you now, yes, yep.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I want to respond to Councillor Hammond. Certainly, I was not, and I never have advocated a return to central control for centralised control for education. In fact, I think that is part of the problem. And certainly, I'm rather offended that he doesn't appreciate that I do know precisely what has happened in terms of educational development over the last 20 years. And I deliberately included the Blair government because I think the actual downgrading of local authorities' role in education and in other things certainly accelerated under the Blair government. So I was including previous Labour governments in the points that I was making. And I would say that actually this council is rather good at making statements in support and in sympathy with people, but actually we've got powers and we should be using them to do practical things, which is the 3 things that we put in our amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. We are likely to run over by 5 minutes on this motion, so I'd just like to ask the 2 whips for agreement to extend by 10 minutes, this meeting by 10 minutes, please. The 2 whips. Councillor Kamali?
That's fine with us, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lowry?
10 minutes is fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, can I now ask Councillor Randall then to respond as lead member? Councillor Randall.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank my predecessor, Councillor Lindsay, for his time as lead member for Families and Children's Services. I know I have very big shoes to fill, and he's held in great respect by the leader and all other members of the majority party. So I'd just like to thank Councillor Lindsay for his service. Firstly, thank you to everyone who has put forward the motion this evening. It's it's certainly a much more political position to be in, especially around schools, because of course children's education should be primary importance to everyone. And we as a council have been working very, very hard and very strong in order to get children back to school and back to school safely. If I may, Mr. Mayor, refer to the amendment by Councillor Atkinson. I must say I disagree with it. I mean, first of all, belated. I mean, the council has been working tremendously hard to get children back to school, working with DFE, working with the government closely in order to ensure children are back. And I must say that none of our schools at all during the entire period actually closed. I mean, this is something that's special about this borough, and this is something special about our wonderful officers have been doing. Every single one of our schools was open for those having those safeguarding and having those children who need to go to school, especially for those for key workers. In relation to students returning, we have been, which refers to some of Councillor Niles' points, we've established clear and consistent procedures to allow students to return through hygiene guidance. We've put clear instructions out for symptomatic persons, and we do monitor every day, Mr. Mayor, potential COVID cases in our schools. So we're working really, really closely with them to ensure our students can return safely. We've identified and supported those most vulnerable and at great risk within our local communities to come back. And we've trained staff in relation to public health, and especially in regards to aspects of COVID-19. Referring to the amendment in itself, again, completely disagree with it. I mean, I think what Councillor Atkinson and Councillor have put forward in terms of the provisions is somewhat good, but just the focus of it is completely wrong and a bit off the mark. I mean, if I recall, I mean, I had been receiving letters from unions, I've been receiving letters from other members. I mean, I know looking at Sir Keir Starmer, I mean, in the shadow education secretary and all the things that were in the Guardian, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Labour was really pushing not for schools to go back. And we have to strike a balance here. I mean, I think this is really, really silly that, children's education are of prime importance, their safeguarding is of prime importance. And if we've got the proper procedures in place, which is proper safeguarding and proper provisions around COVID, which we have, and again, our borough never closed one of our schools, they all remained open, and we've done a tremendous amount of work. And if we look at those students who did return eventually after the 1st of June, we had between a 25 and 50% retention rate for those students who return, and that is compared to a national average of 11%. And that's just tremendous effort that this borough has actually put forward. We put our education first, and we put our children first, and we don't play politics with our children's futures. In relation to the last point, the government has recently announced £1 billion of additional funding to help our children and young people who have fallen behind in their learning. And again, this goes back to one of the main points. We've got detailed guidance coming out in due course, but 350 million will be nationally funded for tuition for disadvantaged students over the summer months. And we're working really hard again with our DFE counterparts to ensure that money comes to RBKC. There's also a further £650 million which will be available for schools, which will be able to bid over the summer period and for those students to catch up on tuition. And once again, we're working closely with our schools who have fallen behind, including children of the groundhog cohort, and giving them all the support they need. So once again, Mr. Mayor, I thank Councillor Lindsay and I thank Councillor Atkins and Niall for their amendment. Unfortunately, I have to disagree with it, but I believe this council's been in an extremely strong position, especially around our education and youth provision compared to others. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duran, you will have a chance in a moment to sum up the motion, but do you wish to reply to the amendment at all before we move to the vote?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, first of all, the first purpose of the motion is to acknowledge and applaud the work of the teaching community in Kensington and Chelsea throughout the coronavirus crisis, and I make no apology for doing that. The second purpose is to set an overall priority for the council in what is clearly a rapidly changing situation with regard to both government advice and funding, and it contains a clear call on leadership to do just that. I do sympathise with the points in the amendment on catch-up provision over the summer and indeed assistance with childcare. Indeed, both points are raised both by myself and by colleagues during the Family Services Select Committee Monday in our reports and in questions to the lead member. I'm sure we can also all agree that we need to root out any racism or discrimination wherever that is found to exist in the school system, whether unconscious or not. And of course, as Councillor Hammond also alluded to, find out the underlying causes of any disparities in results between different ethnic groups, whatever they may be. But I will once again note that the local authority does in fact already have a strong working relationship with schools, and there is close contact, even in so-called normal times, between our officers and senior school leaders. But again, we should trust our teachers and head teachers. We should trust the work they do with appropriate guidance from local and central government, not by creating what the motion appears to suggest, which is a kind of system of top-down control, whether it's from the local government or from central government, that, in my opinion, will do little, if anything, to actually change learning outcomes for our children, which at the end of the day is what schools are supposed to deliver. So while I cannot recommend this particular amendment, I do hope the motion can still meet with support from across this virtual chamber, a motion in support of our teaching professionals and their remarkable work, which I commend wholeheartedly to the council. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will now put the amendment to the vote. Councillor Kamali, are the Conservative group for or against the amendment?
We are against the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Lowry, are the Labour group for or against the amendment?
We are for the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Wade, are you for or against the amendment or abstaining?
I'm for the amendment.
Thank you. Are there any other abstentions or votes not along party lines? So I declare the amendment lost. Councillor Durian, do you wish to sum up any more, or should we go straight to the vote?
We can go straight to the vote, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I now put the unamended motion to the vote. Councillor Kamali, are the Conservative group for or against the motion?
We are for the motion as it stands.
Councillor Lowry, the Labour group for or against the motion?
For the motion.
Councillor Wade, are you for or against the motion or abstaining?
For the motion.
Are there any other abstentions or votes not along party lines? I declare that the motion is carried. As it is now just after 9:30, I'm suggesting that the three remaining motions are moved to the July meeting, which will give us adequate time. They're important topics, and I think they need a proper time for discussion. So I'm proposing we move those to the July meeting, and therefore move on to the final item on the agenda, which is the appointments to the committees and outside organisations. So item 4, appointments to committees and outside organisations. The appointment sheet has been circulated. I call upon Councillor Kamali to move the nominations standing in his name.
I wish to move the nominations standing in my name, Mr. Mayor.
Are the nominations agreed? I declare them carried. Are there any other nominations? Thank you very much. So this concludes the business of this evening's meeting of the Council. The next meeting of the Council is scheduled to be on the 22nd of July. Thank you all very much and good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Mr.